Chapter 8:14. Chao Chiu City, City Lord's Residence. City Lord Chao Wen felt his eyelids twitch early in the morning. He had a feeling that something big was about to happen, but he could not figure out what it was. However, as the lord of a city, even if he was frustrated, Chao Wen still appeared as calm as usual. He even walked around the garden and looked at the precious flowers and trees that the slaves had taken care of so carefully. The flowers and plants in the garden gave off a refreshing fragrance that calmed the mind. That was why Chao Wen liked to think in the garden. Smelling the familiar fragrance, Chao Wen's uneasiness faded. However, he did not dare to be careless. To be able to become the city lord of Chao Chiu City and keep it safe until now, he naturally had the ability. He trusted his instincts. What was going on? Chao Wen lowered his head and looked at the lush greenery in front of him. Just as he was thinking, there was a sudden shout. "Not good. Not good, father." A well-dressed young man panted as he rushed over. Chao Wen frowned. He had always taught his children to be calm and collected. His children usually behaved well, so why were they so rash today? "Why are you panicking?" Chao Wen's voice was not loud, but his tone was stern. He was clearly unhappy with this person's behavior. The one who rushed over was Chao Wen's eldest son, Chao Chuan, who had the highest chance of inheriting the position of city lord in the future. Normally, Chao Chuan would do his best to leave a good impression in front of his father, mimicking his father's mannerisms to a certain extent. But today, he was too shocked. His usual calmness was nowhere to be found. However, Chao Wen's tone brought him back to reality. Pausing, Chao Chuan took a deep breath and quickly said, "The sentries sent word that someone is coming." Ever since the situation had changed, Chao Wen had sent a group of sentries to keep an eye on Chao Chiu City surroundings. The moment there was any movement, they were to report it immediately. A few things had happened during this period, but they were all small problems. Hearing Chao Chuan's words, Chao Wen's brows twitched. Could this be the reason for his uneasiness this morning? "Who are they?" Chao Wen asked. I don't know." Seeing Chao Wen's frown, Chao Chuan hurriedly continued, "Although we don't know who they are, the sentry said that they might be from that direction." He pointed in the direction of the sea. "Where are they from?" Chao Kong asked curiously. "Are they tribesmen like the Longboat tribe?" From time to time, the Longboat tribe would come to Chao Chiu City to trade. Chao Wen knew this, but until now, he only knew that the Longboat tribe was an exception. He heard that the tribes on the other side of the sea were very weak, and the Longboat tribe was the strongest tribe there. The Longboat was the strongest. This was actually a boast made by the Longboat tribe when they first came. Moreover, for a long time, only the Longboat tribe traveled between the two continents, so many people gradually believed it. Chao Wen also knew that due to the influence of the war and the situation, as well as the fact that many places had begun to build cities, the slave masters and nobles had begun to buy slaves in large quantities. Some of the small and medium-sized tribes that originally lived inland had been forced to flee deep into the mountains and forests. It was difficult to find them, and the difficulty of capturing slaves had increased. Therefore, many slave trading organizations had extended their hands to the other continent, such as the largest slave trading organization, Bai. This also made Chao Wen believe that the tribes on the other side of the sea were a bunch of people who were about to become slaves. When navigation technology matured and trade became more stable, Chao Wen wanted to reach out and enslave the people on the other side, taking the gemstones and salt for himself. But now, there were people other than the Longboat tribe here. Why not just enslave them? "How many?" Chao Wen asked. 4 to 5,000. Chao Chuan stammered. "How many?" Chao Wen raised his voice in disbelief. 4 to 5,000. Chao Chuan nodded vigorously. The sentry said they were all quite strong. It didn't seem like they were migrating, more like, they were moving with a purpose. Chao Wen opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but suddenly seemed to be stuck. His expression changed rapidly. This number, in the current environment, was indeed not a small number. 4 to 5,000 people, and not all of them were fleeing or migrating. They were all quite strong. Chao Wen came to the conclusion that they were about to attack the city. Chao Wen could not remain calm. He pushed Chao Chuan aside and ran out of the garden like a gust of wind. In Chaoqiu City, the trading team that had come from afar was busy. They were already familiar with the trading methods here. Whether it was the streets full of shops or the free trading area designated by the city lord, they could walk there with their eyes closed. They were very familiar with the daily activities and where they could hear the gossip. But something happened today. The gold-plated gates of the city lord's residence opened with a series of clanking sounds. A group of 100 cavalrymen charged out. The person in front waved his long weapon mercilessly, shouting and chasing away those in his way. Those in the city who reacted quickly retreated to the sides. What's wrong? Those are the city lord's personal guards. The Chao family. Look at the two in the middle. Is that the city lord? Among the group that came out of the city lord's mansion, there were two people who were dressed differently from the rest. They were brighter and more exquisite. They were Chao Wen and Chao Chuan. Usually, Chao Wen would take a carriage, but now that he was in a hurry, he rode a horse. They're heading towards the city gates. What's the city lord doing there in such a hurry? Looking at the group of people rushing over, anyone with a bit of foresight could tell that something was about to happen. Something was wrong. After reaching the city gates, Chao Wen climbed up the tower and looked into the distance. His heart tightened. Although he could only see a few black dots, he knew that Chao Chuan was right. There were also some suspicious figures in the air. Close the city gates. Chao Wen shouted and ordered the archers to get ready. Those figures in the air were not ordinary birds. Rumble, the heavy city gates were closed. There was a group of people who had just arrived outside the city. Before they could enter, they were stopped outside. No matter how they shouted, begged, or bribed, the city gates would not open. The city lord was personally guarding it. Who would dare to open it? Not only the people outside the city, the people inside the city were even more confused. The groups that wanted to leave the city were all stopped. The onlookers also came closer to the city gates. If not for the Chao family blocking them, they might have already gathered in front of the city gates to see what was going on. Why are they closing the city gates in the middle of the day? Someone was unhappy. That's right, even if something happened, we have to know. It would be easier to escape if we knew. Everyone thought. This doesn't look good. Should we think of a way to leave first? Climb out. Everywhere is heavily guarded at this time. We can hide first. Don't guess blindly. Let's wait and see. However, these discontent and discussions stopped in the next moment. A wolf's howl came from afar. The crowd fell silent, then burst into an even louder discussion. Wolf. It's a wolf. It doesn't sound like an ordinary wolf. I can hear it. We heard wolf howls when we were traveling, but why does this sound like? The person who spoke shuddered. Ferocious beast. An older traveler said with certainty. Their group came from deep in the mountains, so they knew the difference between the howls of wild beasts and ferocious beasts. That howl could only be made by ferocious beasts. Ordinary wild beasts would not be able to make one's hair stand on end. It was as if every nerve in one's body was tense. Caw, high up in the sky, a few eagles flew past and circled above Chaoqiu City. It's too high. It's not easy to shoot, an experienced archer said. Even if they could hit it with enough force, the distance was too far. By the time the arrows reached it, the other party might have already flown away. Judging by their reaction speed, it was clear that they were not easy to hit. That is also a ferocious beast. What's going on? What the hell happened? Is someone attacking the city? The crowd had their own guesses, and their thoughts were like wild horses that had broken free of their reins, running in all directions. At this moment, Chao Wen stood on the city gate tower, his brows furrowed so tightly that they could snap tree branches. Chao Chuan had already received orders to mobilize his men. Chao Wen looked at the approaching group, trying to guess their identities and what to do next. There were 3 large flags in the approaching group. Chao Wen recognized 2 of them. One was the flag of the Longboat tribe, while the other made Chao Wen's heart ache. Yanjiao. He recognized Yanjiao's totem because the royal city had issued an order to hunt down Yanjiao's migration team. The order had drawn Yanjiao's totem on it. Later, Chao Wen had done some research on Yanjiao. Back then, when the royal city had asked for reinforcements, Chao Wen had deliberately delayed. It was not that he wanted to help Yanjiao, but that he did not like to waste his own forces. If the royal city wanted to fight, so be it. All Chao Qiu needed to do was pretend. However, Chao Wen did not expect to see Yanjiao's totem again at this time. They really did come from the other side. Other than Yanjiao and Longboat's totem flags, the third flag was very unfamiliar. There was a strange symbol on the flag that looked like a snake. He had never seen it before, so he didn't know which tribe it belonged to. No matter what, Chao Wen only had one word in his mind: this was bad. As for the flag that Chao Wen found unfamiliar, it was not the totem flag of a tribe. It was a new flag. New did not mean that it was made of new material, but rather that it had only been made recently. Before the Yanjiao team left, all the tribes in the Flaming River Basin had received the news and rushed to the trading point. When the tribes were preparing their totem flags, Xiao Xian suggested making a flag that belonged to the Flaming River Basin Tribal Alliance. As for the totem patterns on the flag, because the Great Alliance was not an alliance of just one tribe, there were many of them and there would be more in the future. It was impossible to use a tribe's totem on the flag. Even for the Flaming Horn tribe, using the twin horn totem would attract strong opposition from other tribes. When it came to totem matters, tribesmen were very stubborn and would not agree even if you killed them. That was why Xiao Xian used a familiar symbol that no one had ever seen before, a dragon. The dragon was based on the general shape of the flaming river that Xiao Xian was familiar with. The Yanjiao people did not object to Xiao Xian's decision. They also thought that Xiao Xian's suggestion was very good. The other tribes who came later also had no objections. Since the flag was based on the flaming river, of course they agreed. When Xiao Xian mentioned that he would put the totems of all the tribes of the Flaming River Alliance on the dragon flag, they couldn't wait to put their totems on it. However, time was tight and they were very cautious about totems. They wouldn't draw a totem on a flag with symbolic meaning without any ceremony or preparation. That was why until now, there was only the dragon in the shape of the flaming river on the Flaming River Dragon flag. Chapter 8:15. The 3 flags represented Yanjiao, the Flaming River Alliance and the Longboat tribe. However, there were other tribes like the Hui tribe, the Mang tribe and the 8 Limbs tribe in the group. They didn't raise their flags not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. In fact, they also regretted it in their hearts. Why didn't they think of making a totem flag to carry? Making one on the spot? No, the totem flag had to be made with the best material. It had to be made by the shamans themselves. Only then could it represent their tribe. It was a pity that they were just here to join in the fun. They didn't even think about carrying the flags. Under the gusts of wind, the 3 totem flags fluttered in the wind, making flapping sounds. As they got closer, the people on the city gate tower could clearly see the patterns on the flag with their eyesight. The unlucky group that couldn't enter the city earlier was no longer knocking on the city gates. Seeing the large group of strangers approaching, they turned around and left. Chao Wen stared at the approaching group and listened to his subordinates discussing their strategy. One suggested to fight directly. While the other party was tired from the long journey, they would kill them without giving them any time to rest. The other suggested to negotiate first. They had to know what the other party's goal was. Perhaps they could negotiate and avoid conflict. If this was in the past, Chao Wen would have preferred the latter. He didn't like to waste his troops to start a war. However, since the other party came from the other side of the sea and there were Yanjiao people among them, they had to be careful. Chao Wen was very annoyed as the people around him argued. He wondered why he was so unlucky to meet them. As he was thinking, Chao Wen's ears twitched and he looked into the sky. A black figure flew across the sky towards Chao Wen. Chao Wen's face lit up as he raised an arm. The next moment, the flying figure landed. It was a black bird about the size of 2 palms. When it flew, it was like a pair of elongated scissors. When it retracted its wings, it was long and thin. This was a bird used to send messages. Chao Wen couldn't wait to untie a small bamboo tube from the bird's leg. He poured out a thin piece of cloth. The cloth was made from a ferocious beast's silk and didn't wear out easily. When he saw the cloth, Chao Wen was sure that it was from the royal city. Looking at the words on the cloth, Chao Xiang's tense face gradually relaxed. "Father, is it a letter from the royal city?" Chao Chuan, who had already mobilized his troops, ran up the city gate tower, sweating profusely. "Yes." Chao Wen replied absent-mindedly. Then, he carefully read the strip of cloth again. He let out a long sigh and said, "Open the city gates." "Ah." Chao Chuan, who was waiting for orders, was stunned. He thought that they were going to start a war. Why did they open the city gates? Seeing Chao Wen frown, Chao Chuan knew that his father was unhappy again. He hurriedly shouted at the city guards waiting for orders, "Open the city gates." The city guards waiting below were also dumbfounded when they saw this result. Seeing that Chao Chuan was not joking, they looked at each other and then followed the leader. They carefully opened the city gate, almost moving the gate bit by bit, as if they were afraid that something would happen if they opened it too quickly. They looked through the crack of the gate at the approaching group outside the city. Roar! The crowd that was squeezing towards the city gate saw this and instantly exploded. They all retreated, keeping a safe distance from the city gate. Only 300 people entered the city. The rest did not approach the city gate, but waited outside. Xiao Xian led Caesar into Chaoqiu city. The others followed closely behind. The city guards did not even dare to collect the entrance fee. After Xiao Xian entered the city, he did not continue walking in the royal city. Instead, he raised his hand and gestured for the others to go buy things. Chao Wen still stood on the city gate tower. He did not go down because he still had not decided how to treat Yanjiao. He did not know what to say. If he was not careful, it would have the opposite effect. Thus, Chao Wen's strategy was to remain unchanged. After the Yanjiao people entered the city, they did not even think of greeting them. Instead, they entered the city like the other traveling groups and went to various destinations to trade. Only Xiao Xian, Mu Fa, and a few others remained at the entrance. Caesar lay next to them, staring coldly at the city guards. Xiao Xian glanced at Chao Wen, who was looking down from the city gate tower. Their eyes met for a few seconds, then looked away. There was no need for words. Both sides understood each other's intentions. Xiao Xian could see that Chao Wen did not want to fight. Perhaps he had received news, so he opened the city gate and withdrew half of the city guards. Chao Wen was relieved. Good, good. It seemed that the other party was only here to trade. He hoped they would leave quickly. The people who entered the city were led by the longboat people because of the language barrier and their lack of understanding of the city. All of them rubbed their palms together. The reason why they came directly to Chaoqiu city instead of going around was to buy things. It was still a long way from here to the royal city. They had to stock up, right? They also wanted to see the slave masters' cities. Unfortunately, after entering the city, their expectations were too high. The further they went, the more disappointed they became. Because they were familiar with Yanjiao's trading point, they were not shocked by Chaoqiu City. Instead, they felt that it was just as so. As for those exquisitely designed things, they were beautiful and naturally, they wanted to buy them to show off. However, they were too expensive and not affordable. It was also troublesome to carry them around. The people who came with them had been to the trading point many times. Even if they were not familiar with trading, they had a rough idea of what the items were and what their prices were. But now, they only had one thought: was this a scam? When they were at Yanjiao's trading point, they thought that many things there were expensive. Now, compared to Yanjiao's prices, they felt like they had a conscience. There was only a small bag of jerky here. Why was it so expensive? However, they had no choice but to come to this foreign place. If the items were not up to their standards, they could not help it. Luckily, they had money. The cities under the control of the 6 great aristocratic families had a unified currency. However, most of the time, they still bartered for convenience. Before they came, the tribesmen had already learned about the prices of various gems from the long boat. They were not afraid of being scammed. Plus, with the long boat people following them, even if they did not know, the long boat people could remind them. Abuli brought 3 Ji tribe warriors and 2 long boat people to a shop. This was a shop that sold food, from grains to biscuits to meat. It was also one of the shops that travel teams often visited. From a tribe to a trading caravan, then to a shop spread throughout the city. Abuli had already learned about this change from the long boat people on the way here. That was why after a few curious glances, he did not look at the people inside anymore. Instead, he focused on the goods in the shop. Someone was moving boxes in the shop. When the person heard someone coming, he put down the box. Before he could straighten his body, he saw 3 pairs of large feet standing at the entrance of the shop. Although it was strange to see such large feet, it was not scary. Different tribes had different styles, so he got used to seeing all kinds of people. What surprised him was that these 3 pairs of feet had rough toes and wounds, just like beggars. The people in the shop thought that they were beggars who could not find a place to stay and could not even be slaves. They were about to chase them away when they looked up. The people in the shop froze as they looked at the dazzling jewels around Abuli's neck. The sparkling and translucent crystals reflected part of the Yangguang's light, while the other part refracted the rainbow-colored light. It was very dazzling. Each of them was as thick as a child's arm. The people in the shop closed their eyes and opened them again. It was not an illusion. You guys. The words he wanted to say were stuck in his throat because he was too shocked. His eyes were wide open. Many travel teams did not show off their wealth, afraid that others would know they had good stuff. But now, the people standing in front of the shop had the aura of a nouveau riche. They did not seem to have any intention of hiding their wealth. Weirdos. Abuli did not care about the people in the shop who were like wooden poles. His eyes were fixed on the bags of grains of different colors and shapes, as well as the dried meat that was easy to carry during travel. There were many types. Although the quality was not as good as the goods from Yanjiao, there was a lot of variety. It was dazzling. Tell me, which one do you want? Abuli asked the 2 people beside him. He was having trouble choosing. That one. A warrior from the drumming tribe pointed at a type of grain nearby. The grains were plump and big enough. They looked delicious. Abuli waved his hand. Buy. That one. The other person pointed at a type of grain. Abuli glanced at it. Buy. And this one. This one looks good too. Sigh, that one looks delicious. Buy. 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 Abuli rarely acted like a tycoon. He knew the value of the crystals in his hands, so he bought without hesitation. He was not afraid of being robbed. There were more than 4,000 people waiting outside the city. That was his confidence. 5 shops away, in another shop that specialized in selling grains, Gigu was twirling a leather bag full of gemstones in one hand. He raised his other hand and pointed at the shelves in the shop. This one, and that one over there. Give me 100 bags of each. Ha! The people in the shop were stunned. Why, you don't have any? Ah. No, we have. Seeing that Gigu was about to leave, the shop owner hurriedly stopped him. What a joke. How could he let go of such a rare opportunity? Some people looked around and realized that there were not many things that could arouse their interest. They fell into a state of, we have money, but other than food, we don't know what else to buy. There were very few gemstones on this side of the continent. Why was it like this? Why was there such a difference between the two continents? The main reason was the core seed. The reason why there weren't many gems here was because of the existence of the core seed. Even though there were many different types of gems here a long time ago, after the core seed appeared, the gems gradually changed and became metal ores. The rarer something was, the more valuable it became. When the nobles fell in love with the gemstones, the value of the gemstones also increased. Unfortunately, gemstones were hard to find. High-quality gemstones were even harder to find. Many slave owners purposely sent their slaves to dig for gemstones, but in the end, the number of gemstones they found was less than the number of slaves who died from exhaustion. However, to the tribesmen on the other side of the continent, they could wear a bunch of gemstones and play with them. If they felt like it, they could even throw a bunch out and return to nature. Because the core seed did not fall there, all the gemstones existed according to the natural laws. For example, places like the drumming tribe were rich in gemstones. They had more gemstones than food. This was also one of the methods the longboat tribe used to make a fortune. The people of Chaoqiu City, as well as the local expedition teams, had a deep impression of the Yanjiao team. They were stupid and rich. Chapter 8:16. In Chaoqiu City, on the largest street, Chu Su and a few Mang tribesmen walked as they observed the people around them. They were dressed in fine silk clothes from the Eight Limbs tribe and wore triangular jade rings made by their own tribe. The Mang tribesmen also liked to put on airs, unconsciously exuding an air of superiority. It was quite intimidating. People who didn't know better would think they were part of the 6 great aristocrats. The 2 longboat tribesmen who were leading the way didn't wear any jade, but they did wear a type of reddish-brown stone ornament. This was a stone that could only be found in the sea. It was tough and delicate, and could be carefully carved. It could be considered a relatively precious gemstone, and its color looked happy. There were slave masters who had bought some from the longboat tribe at a high price. Some of the people who entered the city were also learning from others like Fan Ning, Puyi, Yu, and the rest. They were learning how to be better profiteers. In a shop selling gold wares, the Water Tiger tribe's chief, Chu Li, the Drumming tribe's chief, Ci Du and the rest were in the shop. They had wanted to buy some gold wares as they had heard that there were many cheap and exquisite wares here. That was why they had asked the longboat tribesmen to bring them here. Unfortunately, they were disappointed when they scanned the shop. Naturally, the first thing they looked at was the weapons. However, after the flaming horns got used to the weapons made by Gongjia Ren and the others, they were no longer interested in the weapons in the shop. They could already tell the quality of metal wares and knew that some of them looked good but were actually useless. They were already carrying the new bronze wares they got from the Flaming Horns tribe. After this comparison, they gave up on the idea of buying weapons. They then looked at other gold wares, such as wine jugs, cups, cauldrons and so on. Look, these lines, these patterns, these animal shapes. The shopkeeper held up a golden bowl with animal patterns and was about to brag to Chu Li and the rest when he suddenly paused. Chu Li took out a palm-sized tiger-patterned gold plate. Chu Li had asked the Yanjiao tribesman to make this for him. On one side was the Water Tiger tribe's tiger-patterned totem, the other side was engraved with the words Water Tiger. There was also a circle of rippling patterns around the plate. The people in the shop stared at the gold plate in Chu Li's hand. With their eyesight, they could tell that this was the work of a master craftsman. Other than a few treasures in their shop, the rest could not compare to this one in terms of craftsmanship. Craftsmen's work were hard to get. In terms of craftsmanship, if the Gongjia family claimed to be second, no one would dare claim to be first. This was the difference in skills. However, most of the Gongjia family's craftsmen's creations ended up in the hands of the aristocrats. Very little was sold. The shop owner wanted to raise the price, but when he saw the item in the other party's hand, he suppressed the thought that had just appeared. They were on a completely different level. Now that someone was trying to trick you into buying a substandard product, would you take the bait? A person who had become a leader would not be so stupid. So this man was not ignorant, he had high standards. Now, the shopkeeper was honest. Some people were gullible, some were not. Now, they understood that these people belonged to the latter group. Who could produce a craftsman's work so casually? Whether it was Abuli or Chu Li, similar incidents happened in many places in Chaoqiu City. However, they did not plan to stay for long. They left as soon as they bought their stuff. 300 people were buying things for 4,000 people. They had to take it in batches and they did not hire a carriage. The Yanjiao warriors could carry a small mountain of goods each. It only took them a few trips to and fro. The travelers who came and went kept their eyes on these strangers who had just entered the city. These people gave them a sense of danger. As a result, the locals did not come forward to ask about them. They were too cautious and did not dare to speak rashly. They could only observe them closely. Towards unfamiliar and dangerous people, they were always cautious. Chaoqiu City was on high alert. The 300 people who entered the city only took a stroll around the streets and then left with their goods. According to the usual practice, the guards at the city gates would selectively inspect the goods of some teams leaving the city to prevent smuggling, and the city guards also used this as one of the ways to earn extra money. The traveling teams that came and went, the small and medium-sized teams were angry but did not dare to say anything. But today, no matter how these 300 people entered or left the city guards did not dare to say anything. They were best at looking at people's dishes and could see the situation clearly. At this time, they did not dare to say anything. Didn't they see the city lord standing on the city gate tower? Before Xiao Xian left, Chao Wen called out to him and threw him a piece of cloth about the size of a finger. The king gave this to you. Xiao Xian was surprised. Then, he understood. The Yi family must have been involved to be able to predict their location so accurately, write a letter and have Chao Wen deliver it. When the last Yanjiao man carried a small mountain of goods and walked briskly out of the city, all of Chaoqiu City heaved a sigh of relief. They did not fight. Chao Wen took a few deep breaths without anyone noticing. Chaoqiu City was the furthest from the royal city. As one of the 6 major tribes, the Chao family of the Chaoqiu tribe did not care much about other matters. Other than those who stayed in the royal city, the rest stayed in Chaoqiu City, guarding their own territory. From time to time, they would take goods from the travelers to fill their warehouses. They had heard a little about the Yanjiao tribe. The tribesmen had a lot of salt and fire crystals. They were not smart and were just a bunch of ignorant barbarians. But, those people are completely different from the rumors. Chao Chuan watched the travelers leave and felt like he had been tricked by the people who passed on the information. He did not know about those who did not enter the city, but those who did were not easy to deal with. A few of them gave him a very dangerous feeling. What was the situation on the other side of the sea? He had to go there himself to see and hear for himself. Otherwise, the news he heard from others might not be true. It could even be fatal. For Chao Chuan, who was determined to be the mayor of Chaoqiu City, this was a mistake he should not make. Perhaps he should find some time to go out to sea and take a look. Of course, the prerequisite was that the royal city had really reached an agreement with the other side. Otherwise, if war broke out, he would just stay in Chaoqiu City. Chao Chuan thought to himself. Xiao Xian did not care about what the people of Chaoqiu City said about them. He used his memory to determine the location of the royal city and led the team there. The team would rather rest in the wilderness than in a slave master's city. Compared to Chaoqiu City, the wilderness was safer. Although they had to be on guard against robbers at all times, they dealt with 3 groups of robbers at night. Revealing their wealth in Chaoqiu City still attracted many people to take risks. The Yanjiao people never showed mercy to robbers. The next day, after dealing with another group of robbers, the team encountered a group of special people. Slave masters. Mu Fa looked at the people walking towards them. There were close to 500 people in front of them. More than 300 of them were slaves. They were chained up with special ropes and guarded by slave masters. The people Xiao Xian and the others were looking for were not among them. Most of these slaves were probably local people. The slave masters that Mu Fa mentioned were not aristocratic slave masters, but an organization that made a living by selling slaves. Judging from the direction they were heading, they were probably bringing slaves to Chaoqiu City to sell. Xiao Xian and the others had seen that the slave market was empty in Chaoqiu City. It seemed that the people selling slaves had not arrived yet. That's Qi. Mu Fa saw a very obvious symbol on the carriage pulled by the first 10 slaves. It was the symbol of the word Bai. Qi. When they heard that it was Qi, the tribes who had lost their slaves looked at them with strange expressions. They wanted to rush over and kill all the slave masters. However, the letter from the royal city said that the various cities had been notified of Yanjiao's arrival and that they would not attack them. It also emphasized that if Xiao Xian and the others encountered Qi's people along the way, as long as the slaves were not from the Flaming River Alliance, they hoped that Xiao Xian and the others would not attack them. Otherwise, it might endanger the lives of the people who were taken away. The people in Qi were not good-tempered. The slave masters who were driving the slaves were also curious about Xiao Xian's group. At the same time, they were also on guard. They did not know the purpose of Xiao Xian's group. They only recognized the flags of the Yanjiao and the Longboat tribe. This was something that they had discussed in private when discussing which tribe's slaves were more valuable. The Yanjiao people were strong and strong slaves sold well. As for the Longboat people, they had excellent shipbuilding skills and could be sold for a high price as skilled workers. However, the current situation told them that no matter how much they wanted to turn these tribesmen into slaves, they could not show it on their faces. Otherwise, they would not be able to leave in one piece. It was not without reason that Qi could become the largest slave trading organization on the continent. Their members knew how to judge the situation, and when it was time to be scared, they had to be scared. Facing those hateful eyes, the slave master sitting in the lead car looked calm and asked a routine question, "Do you want slaves?" Newly arrived slaves. "Yes," Xiao Xian said. Hearing Xiao Xian's answer, not only the slave master leader, but also the people on his side were surprised. Xiao Xian actually wanted to buy slaves. The other party's leader was also a veteran, so he reacted quickly. After being stunned at Xiao Xian's words, he quickly regained his senses and smiled, "You can choose whichever you like. The price is negotiable." Xiao Xian walked over and pointed to a thin figure among the slaves, him. The slave master leader raised his eyebrows and looked carefully at the slave that Xiao Xian had picked. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," he said as he lifted his foot and walked over. "Why?" the slave master leader asked. "I don't like him," Xiao Xian said. The slave that Xiao Xian pointed at suddenly raised his head. Like the other slaves, he had a half-dead, lifeless old face. But in his heart, he was cursing, "You can even recognize me?" Chapter 8:17. The slave master leader didn't immediately agree to Xiao Xian's request. Instead, he carefully studied the short, thin, sickly, and weak old slave. He really couldn't find anything special about this slave. As the largest slave organization, the slave masters in the organization all had a pair of good eyes. They could see which kind of slave could be sold for a high price and which kind of slave was useless. This was especially true for those with high positions. Of course, their eyesight was better. However, as a leader, he had sold more slaves than a tribe. Yet, he couldn't see anything special about this slave in front of him. There were so many slaves being escorted this time, and more than half of them were healthy and fit to be coolies. Why did this Flaming Horn tribe member choose an old slave who didn't look special? "Do you know him?" the slave master leader asked. "An old acquaintance." Xiao Xian didn't deny it. The slave master leader looked suspiciously at Xiao Xian and then at the slave. Indeed, many people bought people they knew, but it didn't feel right when it came to a Yanjiao. Even if they did know each other, this old acquaintance was definitely not a friendly relationship. Enemy. No matter how much he thought about it, he still couldn't figure out the strangeness of it. However, the leader still agreed. They were professional slave traders among the slave owners. Buying and selling slaves was their primary task. Since someone wanted to buy slaves, he would sell them. However, the price was a little higher. Mu Fa walked over and haggled with the other side. He had been to Chaoqiu City many times and knew the slave trade well. He knew very well what kind of slaves were worth. In the end, Xiao Xian bought the slave with a water moon stone that wasn't very bright. After the deal was done, the slave master leader took off a palm-sized, animal fang-shaped metal object from his neck. This object was called Shi, and it was a tool used to untie knots. When there were no metal locks, knots were simple, convenient, and low-cost locks. Even after wooden and stone locks appeared, knots were still the mainstream. Sometimes, for the sake of the safety of property, knots would be made into complicated, dead knots. Some knots could produce the effect of 9 rings. Without the help of tools, it would take at least half a day to untie them. However, with a tool like the pyrolite, it could be untied in 2 breaths of time. If the knot was the earliest lock, then pi was the earliest key. In the past, slave owners would always carry the U with them. At the same time, it was to tell others that they had slaves. Sometimes a person would wear several types of buttocks at the same time, just like the buttocks worn by the slave owners who were escorting the slaves. Some were short and thick, some were slender, some were straight, some were more curved, some were simple, some were more complex, and there were even many hollow patterns. Xiao Xian was quite familiar with knots, so he could tell at a glance that there were nearly 100 knots on the ropes that bound the slaves in front of him. Xiao Xian had never seen more than half of the knots before. Although some of the knots looked simple, Xiao Xian knew that they were not easy to untie. It was truly amazing. Different shapes are used to untie different types of knots. Wearing too many buttocks would naturally give people the impression that, "I have more slaves, so I need more buttocks." Slaves were also a kind of wealth. This behavior of the slave owners was also a display of wealth. As the craftsman's imagination ran wild, new ideas appeared one after another. Some more complex and sturdy locks were born, but they were difficult to make, expensive, and very expensive. The nobles who had the means to use metal locks realized the benefits of these new locks, and gradually reduced the frequency of using knots. The more gorgeous metal locks, in addition to being useful, could also be used to decorate the facade, showing the nobility of the slave owners, and were very popular among the nobles. With sturdy locks as a substitute, the knots in daily life no longer needed to be tied. Thus, the buttocks used to untie the ropes were gradually used less, but they did not disappear. Nowadays, the pyrolite continued to be passed down, but its function continued to fade, and it was developed in the direction of accessories. The nobles continued their habit of showing off, wearing the pyrolite to show their noble status as slave owners. Since the pyrolite was no longer used to untie the ropes, it did not need to be so sturdy and durable. The pyrolite made of beautiful gems was a good accessory, and it was more impressive. Some female slave owners would also use it to fix their hair as hair accessories. The pyrolite's production leaned more towards the gorgeous appearance, and not the functional practicality. Therefore, many slave owners still had the tradition of wearing the pyrolite, but the people who wore the pyrolite might not really use it to untie the ropes. However, there was a special group among the slave owners. The people of the pyrolite organization had always been fond of the pyrolite. The pyrolite they wore was still used to untie the ropes. When escorting slaves, they mostly used the ropes, and the ropes were also specially treated to be more sturdy. The people of the pyrolite were good at making knots. If they did not use tools, it would be very difficult to untie the ropes. Of course, if they used a hard and sharp weapon to cut the ropes, they would naturally be able to cut the ropes. However, who would risk offending the pyrolite organization by snatching their slaves? Most of the slaves who tried their best to break the ropes and escape would still be found by the pyrolite organization through various means and punished in a more cruel way. Some of them were sold as food to the cannibal tribes after being squeezed dry of their labor. Very few slaves who fell into the hands of the pyrolite could escape safely. The leader of the slave owners used a machete-like pyrolite to untie a knot that was connected to the slave team. He held the untied rope and handed it to Xiao Xian. The other end of the rope was tied to the old slave. "This slave is yours." The other slave owners who were escorting the slaves were full of joy when they saw that the deal had been made. They felt that this deal was worth it. They had made a lot of money. Water moon stones were rare here. They could also be used for illumination and were more valuable than ordinary gems. An old slave who did not have much labor in exchange for such a gem was not bad. However, the leader of the slave owners did not have much joy on his face. Instead, he became more and more puzzled. He did not regret making this deal. Whether it was a loss or a gain, he would admit it himself. However, there was still a strange feeling in his heart. When he left, he looked back at the old slave with a crooked back several times. Unfortunately, he still could not see anything. When the slave team left and went far away and could not be seen, Xiao Xian looked at the old slave who was standing there with his head down. "Still pretending? Do you think I don't know who you are?" The others were even more curious by Xiao Xian's words. They looked left and right. They had never seen this person before. I don't know, what are you talking about?" The old slave's hoarse voice trembled as he spoke in a native dialect. Even the Longboat tribe who came here had already learned the local dialect, but they were not as good as him. Gigu and the others were even more puzzled. Who was this? Could it be that Xiao Xian knew him when he came here? They had been on the other side all this time, so they definitely did not know this person. While thinking, Gigu heard Xiao Xian say, "Stop pretending, Robber 7. Robber 7. Thousands of pairs of knife-like eyes swept over. The Yanjiao people's view of robbers was as disgusting as feces. Ever since they knew that robbers came here, the Yanjiao people were excited and gloating. Now, they actually saw robbers again. What an old acquaintance. Years ago, Robber 7 went to Yanjiao's farm to steal cabbages and was caught. Xiao Xian beat him down. Later, this person teamed up with other robbers to steal the green-faced fanged beast but was chased by Xiao Xian. In the end, he could only whistle for reinforcements while being demoted. Now, they met again. Knowing that he could not hide, Robber 7's face contorted. Previously, when he was in the group escorting the slaves, he thought that he was a genius. Once he got into Chaoqiu City, he would find a chance to escape and piss off the Bai people. La 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 la, the victory song of the robbers kept repeating in his heart. Robber 7 was very pleased with himself. However, before he even got to Chaoqiu City, he met Xiao Xian, his nemesis. He had already put on a disguise, but Xiao Xian still recognized him. Every time he met a Yanjiao person, nothing good happened. Robber 7 felt that he was so unlucky because he did not pay respects to his ancestors before this operation. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the old slave, who was originally weather-beaten, dispirited, and weak, gradually began to change. He was no longer stooped, his back straightened, and his shriveled body bulged like an inflated balloon. There was also a burst of creaking sounds of bones dislocating. Gigu and the others looked at the slave with surprise, confusion, and then anger. At the same time, they all thought, "Fuck, it really is him." Robber 7. The Yanjiao people stretched their shoulders and surrounded Robber 7 in the middle. They laughed coldly and their eyes seemed to say, "See if I don't beat you to death." Robber 7 seemed to be frightened. He stood there in a daze, his eyes glazed over. However, Xiao Xian knew that this guy must be thinking of a way to escape. Looking at the surrounding terrain, Xiao Xian confirmed that it would be difficult for Robber 7 to escape. He asked again, "Tell me, what did you steal this time?" Thieves wouldn't hide after stealing. Others were afraid of being found out, but they were afraid that others wouldn't know. They would even show off. The more precious an item was, the crazier they would show it off. They wanted to let everyone know about it. However, Robber 7 might not tell the truth in order to protect his gains. As expected, Robber 7 did not respond to Xiao Xian's question. Xiao Xian did not rush him either. He said, "We will be going to the royal city this time. At the same time, we will bring a message." Robber 7 lowered his head and did not move. However, Xiao Xian knew that he was listening. He continued, "We will tell the people of the royal city that Robber 7 used all his effort to steal the underpants of Chao 1, the lord of Chaoqiu City." Robber 7 raised his head and looked at Xiao Xian, "This is an insult to my robbing skills. Not to mention Chao Wen's underpants, he could easily steal the underpants of the people in the royal city's palace. This kind of low-level method was something that only newbies would do. Why would Robber 7 do it? He was going to be the head of the robbers. The royal city was filled with large caravans and traveling teams. This kind of entertainment news would probably spread like wildfire. Perhaps, some people who had already been harmed by the robbers would enthusiastically announce Robber 7's gains and add some extra information to make the news more interesting. Obviously, Robber 7 had thought of many things. "Heh, you think people will believe you?" Robber 7 looked nonchalant. "You can try," Xiao Xian said calmly. Robber 7 did not say anything. If the Yanjiao people threatened him with violence, he would have made up all kinds of lies to deceive the Yanjiao people. However, Xiao Xian mentioned this, it was a matter of reputation. This was simply pouring dirty water on his reputation. Moreover, these words were not that damaging if it was said by others. However, since it was said by the Yanjiao people, Robber 7 had to be more careful. He was afraid that the Yanjiao people would slander him even more. He was preparing to increase his ranking, he did not want to be affected by this. After thinking for a while, Robber 7 said listlessly, "Ah. It's a. The Bai people call it the leader's bone lock." Robber 7 could not help but feel proud. He had stolen it from the leader of the Bai group. He planned to use it to increase his ranking in the robbers. Chapter 8:18. A long time ago, when productivity was low, the tribesmen didn't have so many skills. The key they used was made of bones, stones, and straw ropes. They were called bone locks and stone locks. Today, some people still use these names, such as the members of the Bai organization. Chief's bone lock. The crowd did not know much about this, but they could guess that it was something similar to the chi. Moreover, it was quite special, which could be seen from the word leader in its name. Yes. Robber 7 said proudly, that's the symbol and proof of identity of every leader of Bai. When the new leader takes over, the old leader will hand it over to the new leader. Rumor has it that it was made from the hardest bones of a beast that no longer exists. In addition to the tools they used to untie knots, the slave masters of the Black Panther organization also had a symbol of status, similar to an identity token. Within the organization, the pendants owned by people of high rank were more complex in construction, but the complexity was not the kind of complexity that aristocrats used for ornaments, but the complexity of practicality. When making a knot, the pie could be used to make a more difficult knot to untie. When untying a knot, the pie could be used to untie the knot faster. What Robber 7 stole was the item that symbolized the leader's identity. It could be considered as a significant. Without it, there would be one less step in the transition between the old and the new in the organization. Although it was not as serious as the heirloom seal, no one would be willing to become a leader without the heirloom seal. They would always feel that something was missing, and they would not have the confidence to do so. No one would be able to tolerate it being stolen. Did you really steal the chief's bone lock from Bai? The others asked suspiciously. Of course, I stole it from the leader of Bai, C. Robber 7 was dissatisfied with the crowd's suspicion. How powerful was he? These people actually doubted him. You hid among the slaves to avoid C's pursuit? Xiao Xian asked. Yes. Not only did Robber 7 not feel cowardly about his escape, he even felt that he was smart. C would never have thought that he would hide in the group that was escorting the slaves. Robber 7 had lost twice to Xiao Xian and was even demoted. If it weren't for the fact that some of the people in front of him had died, he would have been demoted to 8. Humiliation. Later on, due to the cataclysm, the two continents were brought closer together. The robbers shifted their target to this side and targeted the nobles. Due to his previous failure, Robber 7 had carefully analyzed and tried his best to improve himself. He even learned how to change the smell of his sweat. In other words, he could perfectly imitate the smell of others. This was also the reason why he could avoid the tracking insectoids with a keen sense of smell. However, he had no idea what method C was using to track him down. Even without any trace of his scent, he was still able to catch up, albeit a little slower. Robbers were good at disguises. When Robber 7 was escaping from C's pursuit, he decided to sneak into the group of slaves. That way, he managed to evade a few waves of C's men. C was unwilling to make this matter public, so he sent out his trusted aides who held relatively high positions in the underworld. Even the leader of this troop had to bow and scrape at the sight of them. Unfortunately, it was not without reason that it was dark under the light. Every time he saw a wave of people pass by, Robber 7 would feel proud of himself, thinking that he was a genius. One night, the old slave passed away due to illness. Robber 7 found an opportunity to spread the poison on the other slaves nearby. Then, without anyone noticing, he moved the old slave's corpse away and disguised himself as the old slave. According to Robber 7's plan, he planned to escape after sneaking into Chao City and hide in a sea of people. The more crowded a place was, the more advantageous it would be for him. However, he didn't expect to fall into the hands of Yanjiao again. Robber 7 still couldn't believe that he had fooled the people in the palace, the leader of the #1 slave trading organization, Bai. Those experienced slave masters couldn't see anything special about him, and yet he had fallen into the hands of the same person 3 times. He decided that he would run away the next time he saw Xiao Xian. He couldn't count on any luck. Robber 7 chose to tell the truth because he hoped that Yanjiao would spread the word of his glorious deeds. Secondly, he had already thought of a way to escape. First, he would lead the Yanjiao out to search, then find a chance to slip away. Where's the item? Gigu asked, where's the leader's bone lock? Here it comes. Robber 7 was about to answer when Xiao Xian said, don't listen to his nonsense. Get a few men and strip him. Robber 7 was speechless. Wait a minute. Shouldn't he have told the Yanjiao that the item was hidden somewhere? Then the Yanjiao would let him lead the way, then he would lead the Yanjiao to search for it and finally find a chance to escape. But now, things were going the wrong way. Robber 7 was restrained by the men around him. Even if he had 3 heads and 6 arms, he wouldn't be able to escape. Robber 7 was about to argue when Xiao Xian came over with a knife. The reflection of the knife's blade reflected Yang Guang's piercing cold light, scaring Robber 7. Wait! You can't kill me. Robber 7's mind raced as he shouted. Then you can do it yourself. Take out the item hidden in your abdomen, Xiao Xian said. Robber 7's mind was full of wicked ideas but he couldn't think of a way out. Xiao Xian's words left him speechless. WH. What? Robber 7 stuttered. Xiao Xian pointed the tip of his knife at Robber 7's abdomen. Take out the item here. Are you going to hide it and lay an egg? Robber 7 gritted his teeth. How did you know? The men around him were confused, but they quickly reacted. Robber 7 was hiding something. The men around him looked at Robber 7's abdomen. Knowing that he couldn't avoid it, Robber 7 didn't have the mood to chat anymore. His expression was gloomy as he moved his arm. Let go, I'll do it myself. The man holding Robber 7 let go. Robber 7 moved his finger and a piece of bone the size of a fingernail appeared in his hand. The edge of the bone was sharp. The man who held Robber 7 felt a chill run down his spine. If Robber 7 really went all out, he would be the first to die. He was too careless. Robber 7 didn't care about what the others thought. He was only thinking about how to protect his loot. Robber 7 used the small piece of bone to draw a line the length of a finger on his abdomen. It was so shallow that the men thought it wouldn't even break his skin. However, they realized that the shallow cut was getting bigger and bigger. Robber 7 used his finger to pull out a piece of skin that looked similar to human skin. Camouflage. In order to increase the success rate of every attack, the robbers had mastered more and more camouflage techniques. Now, they didn't just rely on physical changes, they also relied on external aids. When the fake skin was revealed, there was a dent in Robber 7's abdomen. In the dent was a palm-sized object that looked like a beast's tooth. Call. Could this be the chief's bone lock? Gigu guessed. For Robber 7 to be so protective of it, it must be something extraordinary. Furthermore, Robber 7 had said that he stole the chief's bone lock from C, the leader of the Bai organization. The possibility of it being the chief's bone lock was high. So that's where he hid it. No wonder he kept bending over. Wasn't he afraid of getting hurt? Ao asked. Even if the claw wasn't as sharp as a blade, it still had a curved point. It wasn't safe to wrap it up in something. If the organs in the abdomen were to get hurt because of the hidden object, it would be dangerous. After all, there weren't always witches out there to save him. Robber 7 pursed his lips and remained silent. In the eyes of others, Robber 7 had gone all out to hide the object. However, Xiao Xian could see through his special vision that the body structure of a robber was different from others. When Robber 7 hid the object, his abdomen had 4 more pieces of bone than others to protect his organs. Robber 7 had considered many factors before he dared to steal the object. People who couldn't think of robbers in a normal way had their body structure designed to be better camouflaged. At the same time, they could protect themselves. Even if their bones were dislocated, their muscles were compressed, and their organs moved, it wouldn't affect them at all. Many organizations here were formed by people of different backgrounds. However, the robbers had a common ancestor. Due to their bloodline, they were born with the advantage of camouflage. However, there were also differences between different individuals. Just like Robber 11 and Robber 12 that Xiao Xian had seen before, they were slightly inferior to Robber 7. Robber 7's body structure was better than Robber 7's. In the future, Robber 7 might really become one of the top 3 robbers. Moving his gaze away from Robber 7, Xiao Xian took the chief's bone lock from Robber 7's hands. Robber 7 couldn't bear to let go and gripped the chief's bone lock with a pained expression. The chief's bone lock was similar to the claw worn by other slave owners. Its general shape didn't look too different, but there were more hollowed-out patterns and a few more curved arcs at the edges. The sharp end still retained the shape of a beast's tooth, while the blunt end was carved into the shape of a beast's head. When he met the pair of clearly vaguely carved beast eyes, he could clearly feel the pressure coming from the bone lock. Even if that life form had already died and this bone had been artificially carved, anyone who saw it would still be able to feel the ancient and majestic aura at first glance. The reason Xiao Xian could recognize Robber 7 at first glance was because of this chief's bone lock. In his special vision, this thing was very bright, and the skeletons of the slaves and slave owners paled in comparison. It was like the only star in the hazy night sky. Xiao Xian couldn't ignore it even if he wanted to. Of course, when he saw this thing on the body of an old slave who looked like he was about to die, it was puzzling. In fact, Robber 7's disguise had improved a lot compared to before. At first glance, even Xiao Xian couldn't recognize him from the crowd. However, with this chief's bone lock, Xiao Xian took a closer look and found some clues. Ever since he came out of the strange spiritual world of the Yi family, Xiao Xian noticed that he could see the different fire seeds fused in different people. Everyone's fire seeds were different, just like fingerprints. No matter how well Robber 7 hid, Xiao Xian could still recognize him after he took a closer look. Gigu and the others were curious about how Robber 7 managed to steal the chief's bone lock from C. However, Robber 7 would never answer such questions that involve technology. "Xian, what do you plan to do with this thing?" Gigu asked after he took the chief's bone lock from Xiao Xian and studied it. "Take it. When the time comes, we'll negotiate with C. If they can't come up with something satisfactory, they can forget about getting it back," Xiao Xian said. Gigu nodded. He had the same idea. The chief's bone lock was indeed a good item. Its hardness was so strong that even new bronze might not be able to leave any obvious marks on its surface. Moreover, the greatest use of this item was to tie and untie knots. However, to C, it was much more important. Instead of keeping it for themselves, they might as well use it to their fullest potential and negotiate with C. C and Robber were like mosquitoes and bedbugs in the eyes of the crowd. No one liked them. If they could steal something from Robber 7 and negotiate with C, it couldn't be any better. Seeing that the Yanjiao had no intention of returning the item, Robber 7 truly felt like he had nothing left to live for. His plan to get into the top 3 would have to be postponed. No. He couldn't give up so easily. Robber 7's mind raced as he tried to think of a way to get the item back from Yanjiao. When he was first captured by Xiao Xian, Yanjiao had to negotiate with him before letting him go. "Wait." Robber 7 called out to Xiao Xian and Gigu. He stared at the chief's bone lock in Gigu's hand before turning to Xiao Xian. "I'll give you a piece of information in exchange." "What information?" Gigu asked curiously. He wanted to hear what Robber 7 had to offer in exchange for the chief's bone lock. "It's definitely worth it to you. If I tell you this information, you have to return it to me. It's useless for you to keep it anyway. It might even cause trouble," Robber 7 said. "You first." Xiao Xian looked at Robber 7. "No, you have to agree first. I'll tell you later. Then forget it." "Wait. What's the rush?" Robber 7 spoke urgently as he spoke to Xiao Xian. He was afraid that Xiao Xian would leave if he was too slow. "I know you're here for the lost tribesmen. I can give you an important piece of information about Pyrolite in exchange. It might help you negotiate with Pyrolite and Royal City." "Pyrolite and Royal City?" Xiao Xian and Gigu keenly noticed the hidden meaning in Robber Seven's words. How did you know about such important information? Gigu asked. Robber Seven said confidently with an unconcealable smugness, I overheard it when I was stealing. Robber Seven's outlook on life was that stealing wasn't wrong, it was glorious. Gigu fell silent. He glanced at Xiao Xian and saw Xiao Xian nod. He waved his hand and signaled the others to leave, leaving only Gigu, Xiao Xian and Ao. Chapter 8:19. When there was no one else around, Gigu turned to Robber Seven. Speak. If it's worth it, we'll return it to you. Really? Robber Seven looked at Gigu suspiciously, then at Xiao Xian. That's only if it's worth it, or else, it's worth it. Definitely worth it. Even if it's not, I can give you some other information, such as what kind of person C is. After Robber Seven suffered at the hands of Yanjiao, he would be well prepared for every operation. This time, he had done a lot of preparation to steal C's things. Seeing that Gigu and Xiao Xian had agreed, Robber Seven ignored Ao's frown and told them what he knew. C is close to the new king of the royal city, Ji Fang. Robber Seven's first sentence shocked Gigu and Ao. Xiao Xian, on the other hand, wasn't too surprised. It made sense for a slave owner to be close to a slave trader. However, from Robber Seven's tone, C and Ji Fang were working together. Perhaps Ji Fang's success in seizing the throne was also due to C's help. Participating in the fight for the throne was bound to bring many benefits. No wonder Bai could become the largest slave trading organization. You're saying that it was Ji Fang's order to capture slaves from our side? Ao's eyebrows were almost raised. No. Robber Seven shook his head. According to what he overheard, it was C's order to capture slaves. After Ji Fang found out, he called him over and told him to bring all the people from the Flaming River trading point here and not to sell them. C didn't seem happy about it, but he didn't refuse. I knew you were coming because I overheard it. Robber Seven didn't expect Yanjiao to come from Chaoqiu City. If he had known, he would have stayed as far away as possible. You want to trade this information with us? Xiao Xian asked. What's the rush? There's more. Robber Seven scratched his head and continued, let's talk about Ji Fang. Other than his many helpers, there's another important reason why he could seize the throne, his sword. Sword? Xiao Xian was confused. Not bad. One of the main reasons why the Ji family could become the leader of the 6 major tribes in the royal city and sit on the throne was because of their swords. If this had happened 1,000 years ago, many people would have known that the Ji family's sword was known as the king's sword. The aristocrats' swordsmanship actually originated from them. Isn't the Ji family's sword made by the Gongjia family? Gigu asked. He understood this from Gongjia Ren. No. Robber Seven glanced at Xiao Xian and the other two with an, I knew you wouldn't understand, look. This was something he had investigated before he made his move. He had also learned a lot of secrets through various channels. Before the Gongjia family appeared in the royal city, the Ji family's swordsmanship made them the leader of the 6 tribes in the royal city. The other tribes feared them. Of course, the Yi family was an exception. The Yi family did not have such intentions. The other 4 tribes were no match for the Ji family in terms of martial prowess. That was why the Ji family was crowned king. Now, the Ji family's advantage is even greater. The only threat to the Ji family, the Yi family, has been crippled. The Yi family is now divided by internal and external problems. Other than a few puppets, there are not many people left in the family. The 6 aristocrats of the royal city should now be called the 5 aristocrats of the royal city, Robber Seven sighed. Let's not talk about the Yi family first. Let's talk about the Ji family's swords. Could it be that the Ji family's swordsmanship is better than the Gongjia family's? Gigu placed great importance on this question. As for the Yi family, he had already heard some predictions from Yi Zong. That was why he was not surprised to hear about the Yi family's results. That's not it. In terms of skill, the Gongjia family is better. However, the Ji family's swords can break the swords of some of the Gongjia family's blacksmiths. The reason is that the Ji family uses blood to make their swords. The Ji family's blood can make swords. Make swords with human blood? This time, even Xiao Xian was shocked. He always thought that only the blood of a few special beasts could be used to make swords. Who would have thought that human blood could be used to make swords as well? Anyway, Xiao Xian's own blood could not do it. With the core seed, they had a gold mine. Plus, their own blood could be used to make swords. With their logistics, they had large fields of grains. One could only imagine how powerful the Ji family was. But Robber Seven's tone was strange, his expression perverted. The glorious history of the Ji family where everyone could make swords is long gone. After the Ji family established the royal city, there were people who could not make swords with their blood. Robber Seven was so excited to talk about other families' dirty secrets and gossip that his spittle almost landed on Xiao Xian and the other two's faces. However, if what Robber Seven said was true, it was quite interesting. When the situation first appeared, they were all in doubt and self-doubt. However, gradually, they realized that more and more people in the family were in the same situation. In the end, in order to maintain the glory of swords, they lured the Gongjia family into the royal city. It could be said that the Ji family was the main reason why the Gongjia family was able to establish a foothold in the royal city so quickly. Since their blood could not be used to make swords, they would let others make better swords. After all, they had to carry a sword with them. It was a tradition. However, although it was over, many people still felt sorry for the Ji family's ancestors. Perhaps the Ji family's ancestors were reflecting in their graves. How could they have given birth to a bunch of useless people? Perhaps they were not even his children. The Ji family used their blood to make swords, that was how they became royalty. How could there be a bloodline that could not be used to make swords? What a disgrace, what a disgrace. Ridiculous, ridiculous. The Ji family suspected that their bloodline was tainted, but they would not embarrass themselves in public. They still maintained their kingly demeanor, but they lacked a sense of confidence. Very few people knew about this secret because the Ji family purposely kept it a secret. In the past 1,000 years, the number of Ji family members who could use their blood to make swords could be counted with 10 fingers. However, these swordsmiths were taking a huge risk. They had to let their blood out to make swords, which meant they were weak. Once they were weak, it would be easy for others to take advantage of them. If they were not careful, they could leave behind serious injuries in their bodies. At the same time, once they succeeded, there would be less resistance to inheriting the throne. Ji Fang once went to Gongjiaheng, hoping that he could forge a satisfactory king's sword. Unfortunately, he didn't succeed. In the end, Ji Fang used his own blood to forge the sword and was almost assassinated because of it. Robber Seven told him everything he knew. Ji Fang's usurpation of the throne must have caused some opposition in the family. However, when the king's sword appeared, no one said a word. This sword was the proof of royal blood. No matter how despicable Ji Fang's usurpation of the throne was, no matter how many tricks he used, once the sword appeared, the entire Ji family fell silent. The Ji family hated the Yi family. They could have divined the location of the star butterfly, but they were worried that the Ji family's power would harm them. That was why they did not perform the divination until Yi Xiang's incident happened. After the Yi family's incident, the Ji family was the first to attack them. Xiao Xian remembered meeting Ji Fang at Gongjiaheng's place when he went to the royal city. Ji Fang seemed to have gone there to ask for a sword but failed. Heng could not make a sword of Ji Fang's standard. According to Robber Seven, Ji Fang must have started the sword not long after Xiao Xian left. He had to be careful when facing Ji Fong in the royal city. There must be something special about the king's sword. What about Si? Tell me about the leader of Bai, Si. What kind of person is he? Asked Xiao Xian. Si. Robber Seven's high spirits were dampened. Si, to many people, means death. No, it's worse than death. He's the leader of the slave traders. In his eyes, there are no nobles, no tribes, only the value of slaves. There is a term in the Bai organization called provincial people. No matter what this term means in other places, in the Bai organization, its meaning is to examine whether a person has the possibility of becoming a slave and how much he or she is worth. It was like looking at meat on a chopping board with a critical eye. Si wears black and has a long, crossed staff. There's a knife at the end of the staff in the shape of a horizontal bai. The carving on it is an eye. Robber 7 picked out everything he knew about Si and only stopped when his mouth was dry. He looked at Xiao Xian and the other two. I spent a lot of effort to gather this information. Hurry up and return it to me. No, it's not worth it. Xiao Xian looked at Robber 7. Tie him up. Ignoring Robber 7's hysterical curses, Xiao Xian ordered someone to stuff a piece of animal skin into Robber 7's mouth. He turned to Gigu and said, "Take the others and continue forward. I'll meet Si." You want to use Robber 7 to lure Si here? Will Si really come? Asked Gigu. Si will be here soon. Xiao Xian crushed the knotted straw rope in his hand and scattered it. Gigu wanted to say that he would stay as well, but considering the large group, he swallowed his words. In the end, other than Xiao Xian, Gan Xie, Thunder Mountain Tribe's leader Lu Zhai, Ji Tribe's leader Ci Du, Water Tiger Tribe's leader Chu Li and Longboat Tribe's leader Mu Fa remained. They all wanted to meet the legendary leader of the largest slave trading organization, Si. Robber 7's mouth was gagged and he was trapped in a cocoon. Only his head was exposed. At first, he wriggled left and right, but now, he was calm. The sun gradually set and the sky darkened. The night breeze carried a faint chill. Robber 7, who was about to be turned into a cocoon, was thrown onto a large rock on the grass. He didn't scream or struggle, he just looked up in silence. His eyes were focused on the sky, as if he was a philosopher pondering the mysteries of the universe. Who am I? Where am I? What do I want to do? Clang clang clang, the sound of chains rang under the night sky, attracting everyone's attention. Xiao Xian sat on the rock and looked in the direction of the sound. In the distance, a figure appeared. His black cloak fluttered in the wind. He held a long sickle-like object in his hand. He looked like a grim reaper walking out from the night. Chapter 820. Si. Even though Mu Fa had never met the legendary leader of the Bai organization, Si, he had heard of Si's appearance from others. Ever since Si became the leader of the slave organization, Si's name had spread far and wide. Mu Fa had even heard that in some of the larger cities, many people used Si's name to scare children, saying that disobedient children would be captured by Si. Mu Fa had also heard from some slave traders that those words might not be lies. As for the scythe-like object in Si's hand, it was actually a long handle with the word 10 on it. At the top of the handle was a sharp weapon in the shape of a beast's fawn. Unlike the other katanas used to untie knots, the one on the top of Si's long handle looked more like a katana than a larger katana. It was made of metal with sharpened edges. Under the night sky, it glimmered with a cold glint as Si moved. The scythe at the top of the long handle had an engraving of an eye, representing the people of the province. Looking at the engraving, one would feel as though one was being watched, like a piece of meat placed on a chopping board while the other party was measuring one's worth. Mu Fa sized up this slave leader who could scare children to tears with just his name alone. His vigilance grew. Lu Zhai, Ci Du, Chu Li and the rest were also on high alert. After C appeared, Robber 7, who was tied up like a cocoon, glanced over before continuing to study the night sky. It was as though he couldn't feel C's murderous gaze. He was as calm as ever, at least on the surface. Xiao Xian glanced at C, then turned his head to scan his surroundings. Other than C, there were others. Clang clang clang, under the moonlight, following the sound of hurried running, 6 slender figures in black robes with half-masked faces appeared. Each of them held a chain in their hands. The clanging of the chains shone with a cold glint. The 6 of them split into 2 sides, with 3 on each side. Together with C who had appeared first, they formed a semicircle while Xiao Xian and the rest stood in the center of the semicircle. The formation of these men in black gave everyone a familiar feeling. It was as if they were about to surround and hunt. However, the Yanjiao people surrounded and hunted ferocious beasts, while the Hue surrounded and hunted the hunters. Mu Fa had heard of a saying before, no one who had been bound by these chains had ever managed to escape. C and the other 6 stopped at a distance of 50 steps away. Their gazes were icy cold, and the temperature around them seemed to have dropped because of them. Their icy gazes swept across Xiao Xian and the others, and finally stopped at Robber 7. It was as if they were frozen in ice, and their gazes were as sharp as knives, as if they wanted to slice off Robber 7's flesh. It was impossible for Robber 7 to not notice such intense stares. However, Robber 7 continued to stare at the night sky, ignoring C and the others. He pursed his lips indifferently. The men holding the chains were C's trusted aides, and they were also the ones who had hunted Robber 7 down. To Robber 7, these people had been looking for him for so long, and yet he managed to escape so easily. They were nothing to worry about, and were all useless. Instead of thinking about these useless fools who had rushed over, he might as well think about how to escape. C's cold, murderous gaze shifted from Robber 7 to Xiao Xian and the others. He frowned in dissatisfaction. "Where's the thing?" His voice was like the friction of cold chains, sending chills down everyone's spine. Robber 7 stopped playing dead and rolled his eyes at C. "Don't ask me." He then pointed at Xiao Xian with his lips, signaling C to look to the side. C's brows knitted together, and his aura grew colder. He could sense that the stolen bone lock was no longer here, but when he followed the trail, he bumped into this group of people. His chilling gaze was no longer on Robber 7, but on Xiao Xian, who was leading the group. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if he was about to unlock his shackles and lock them onto his target. "Yanjiao." Although his tone was doubtful, C's words had already confirmed his suspicions. C looked at the other 5. Other than Xiao Xian, none of them were Yanjiao, and their identities were different as well. However, C's gaze lingered on Gan Xie for a little longer. The other 4 were easy to deal with, including the only Yanjiao person present. C did not find anything special about them. The only one that puzzled him was Gan Xie. Based on his judgment, this person should be a dead man. It was strange that he did not understand. However, the most important thing right now was to retrieve the stolen bone lock. Everything else could wait. Due to the fire seed, there were always some strange tribes that stood out from the rest. Perhaps that dead man was one of them. C wondered if he could take a beating. If he could he be sold as a slave for a high price? Due to his profession, C's first thought was still the value of this person as a slave. After a brief moment of contemplation, C looked at Xiao Xian. He knew that this group was led by Yanjiao, so he still had to keep an eye on Yanjiao. "Did you take it?" C asked. Without waiting for Xiao Xian's reply, he continued, "Hand it over." He did not give Xiao Xian any chance to explain. He only wanted the item, and did not want to hear any nonsense. "It's not here," Xiao Xian replied. "Of course I know it's not here. What I'm saying is, you, bring it back to me. Or else." With a flick of his wrist, a blinding light flashed. The razor-sharp edge of the Shi blade was pointed at Xiao Xian's position. Or else what? Xiao Xian retorted. Or else, all of you will be captured and turned into slaves. Si said in a cold voice. Just as Robber 7 had said, the members of the Shi organization continued the tradition of the people of the province. In other words, they viewed everything as slaves. Generally speaking, they would not attack free people. The so-called free people were those who had left their tribe and were not part of any organization. They were free people who moved about freely. However, if they came across a free person who they deemed to be valuable, they would turn them into slaves. This was also the reason why many people were wary of Shi. Of course, during special times, such as when the slave trade was in short supply, they would deliberately attack the tribes. Attacking the tribes on this side of the continent might cause some trouble, but if they attacked the tribes on the other side of the sea, the trouble would be much smaller. Did they not know that the Yanjiao tribes were difficult to deal with? Of course they did. Before they attacked, they had done a preliminary investigation. For safety's sake, some of them even attacked the tribes around Yanjiao. However, they had underestimated the Yanjiao tribe's capabilities. They did not expect Ji Fong to personally order them to attack Yanjiao's territory. How could they just let a captured slave go? This was not in line with Shi's style. However, Ji Fong was the one who said it. Although Si was dissatisfied, he would not destroy his partnership with Ji Fong over such a small number of slaves. Now, however, things had changed. Since they had encountered Yanjiao and they had something that belonged to them, Ji Fong had no say in this matter. Shi's style was to bite and not let go of any meat they touched. Even if they could not capture them, they would make them bleed and let them know the power of the #1 slave organization, Shi. The cowardice of others was their glory. Mu Fa looked at Si suspiciously, confirming that Si was not joking. Did they really dare to defy Ji Fong's orders and attack Yanjiao? Mu Fa turned to Xiao Xian, wanting to see the reaction of the Yanjiao Grand Elder. However, he did not see anything out of the ordinary from Xiao Xian's expression. He only felt that the atmosphere was a little strange. Capture me? Xiao Xian's tone was calm, as if he was just casually asking if the other party had eaten. There was not a hint of anger on his face. However, Robber 7, who was not far from Xiao Xian, shuddered violently. Then, Robber 7 became excited again, laughing maniacally in his heart. Ha 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 ha. He said it. Si really did say it. Just when Robber 7 thought he was the biggest thorn in Yanjiao's side, just when he thought his future was bleak, an idiot who could draw more hatred than him popped up out of nowhere. How could Robber 7 not be excited? Robber 7 knew that the tribesmen did not like the term slave. Back in the day, the few major tribes had fought a battle of wits and courage with the slave masters of the desert. Si's words just now had drawn a lot of hatred. He looked at the few people beside him, they were burning with anger. Chu Li's fists were clenched so tightly that they cracked. Lu Zhai and Ci Du's faces were pulled long. Gan Xie. Gan Xie was still the same. He did not get angry, instead, he was curiously sizing up Si and the men in black with chains around him. Robber 7's mood began to brighten. After being captured by Yanjiao, he had said everything he needed to say. He even cooperated and acted as bait here. The reason he was so straightforward was not only because he was afraid of Xiao Xian, but also because he wanted to find an opportunity to slip away while Yanjiao was negotiating with Si. After all, the Yanjiao did not like the slave masters who captured tribesmen as slaves. However, he did not expect Si to be even crazier than he expected. Yes, in Robber 7's opinion, anyone who dared to tell Xiao Xian to capture you as a slave was a lunatic. Robber 7 raised his head to look at the night sky. The stars were shining brightly tonight. It was a good time to get out of here. Chapter 8:21. Actually, Si had wanted to make a move on the Yanjiao tribe for a long time. Back when the Yanjiao tribe was still deep in the forest, their presence was insignificant and the Bai people rarely went deep into the forest to tangle with the other tribes. However, after the Yanjiao tribe's great migration, they made their presence known and attracted the attention of the Bai people. Other people might think that a powerful tribe was too troublesome to deal with, but the Bai people were different. In the eyes of the Bai people, the more powerful the tribe, the more powerful the people, the higher the value of the slaves. Their way of looking at people was to measure the value of goods. The people of the feather tribe would be proud of catching a bird with beautiful feathers and would flaunt it. The Bai people would also flaunt when they sold a slave at a high price. Moreover, the higher the rank of the slave master, the higher the standards of the slave master. They would not be interested in normal people, but for a leader like C, it was fine if they did not make a move, but once they did, it would have to be at the level of a tribe leader. However, Ji Fang's warning made C hesitate for a moment. He did not make a move immediately. Instead, he raised the arm that was not holding the she blade and pointed at Robber 7 who was tied up like a cocoon. He said coldly, "Give him to me and I'll take his life." Having his chief's bone lock stolen was C's greatest humiliation. C could still track down the stolen bone lock through certain means. As for Robber 7 who stole the bone lock, of course he would not let him go. At the same time, C also felt that if Robber 7 died, no one would be able to steal the bone lock from him again. He did not think that anyone had the ability to do so, not even the tribesmen in front of him. Therefore, Robber 7 must die. If he died, he would no longer be a threat and no one would be able to make him feel this humiliation. Sensing the murderous aura, Robber 7 did not move, but Chu Li and the others were already nervous. They gulped and looked at Xiao Xian. Seeing that Xiao Xian did not move, they continued to remain silent. Robber 7 looked at Xiao Xian. He would be lying to himself if he said he was not afraid. He knew that Xiao Xian was in charge of this group of people. He also wanted to see what Xiao Xian would do, but he was more worried that Xiao Xian would kill him on the spot. Seeing that there was no response, C glanced coldly at Xiao Xian and the others. "You're not handing it over." As his voice trailed off, C waved his arm and black shadows the size of fingernails shot out from his wide black sleeves. They flew into the bushes and headed straight for Xiao Xian and the others. So, the grass in the path of the black silhouettes that shot into the grass was cut in half. The cut grass flew up and sprayed out from the ground like countless raindrops. As for the black silhouettes that were thrown out, they crashed into the ground not far from Xiao Xian and the others. C's action was the signal to attack. Xiao Xian raised his saber. "Gan Xie, watch Robber 7. Don't let him die so easily. As for you guys," Xiao Xian glanced at Mu Fa, Chu Li and the others. "Don't die so easily." Chu Li, Lu Zhai, Ci Du and Mu Fa, who had led the team through countless trials and tribulations, were speechless. The difference in treatment was a little frustrating. Although Xiao Xian had told them to protect themselves, they were the leaders of their respective tribes. How could they be willing to do that? How could Gan Xie take on 6 of them by himself? Although the moon wasn't very bright, with the combination of moonlight and starlight, with everyone's eyesight, they wouldn't go blind even if it wasn't as bright as the day. Gan Xie's night vision was far better than others, and even Ci Du, Chu Li and the rest had trained themselves to hunt at night after many hunts with the flaming horns. In the forest, the beasts wouldn't let them go just because they couldn't see well at night. Tonight's moon and starlight were much brighter than when they were in the forest. At least they weren't obstructed by the towering trees. Moreover, not all of the Bai people had good night vision. Their movements were also limited in the dark. After receiving C's signal, the 6 black-clothed men around him moved swiftly. They flung out the chains in their hands with brute force and agility. At the same time, there were threads that were not much thicker than a strand of hair. Together with the chains, these threads were easy to overlook. However, it was these threads that made the chains seem alive, releasing even more lethal force. If traps were to be described as interlocking, then these threads and chains were two of the most important factors for the slave masters to set up their traps. This group of people with a long history of slave trading were all experts in knots and ropes. Therefore, they couldn't miss a single detail or movement. Robber 7 was so happy that he wanted to set off firecrackers. Ha ha ha. It's starting. It's starting. However, in order to minimize his presence, Robber 7 had to suppress his excitement. He no longer looked at the sky and pretended to be a philosopher. He observed the battle with great interest and looked for an opportunity to escape. He didn't want to stay. Even if Xiao Xian had no intention of handing him over to sea, Robber 7 didn't think he would have a good ending if he fell into Yanjiao's hands. It was safer to escape. Mu Fa paid close attention to the strings and chains, silently calculating the strengths and weaknesses of both sides. He thought to himself, C's subordinates are indeed as frightening as the rumors say. Not only are they strong, their teamwork is flawless, and their ability to predict and analyze is also impeccable. Perhaps before they even make a move, they have already formed an intricate net in their minds, and the few of us are the prey that this net is trying to capture. Chu Li flicked his wrist. A round shield the size of 2 adult palms slid from his forearm to his wrist. He had asked Yanjiao to help him get it made with Yanjiao's new bronze. As the totemic patterns on Chu Li's body deepened, his entire body inflated. His palms and even his fingers grew in size. The round shield, which was originally slightly bigger, was now just right. Ci Du and Lu Zhai also picked up their weapons. Gan Xie was the only one who stood there barehanded. He didn't have any weapons on him. It was as if he couldn't feel the danger in front of him. Judging from his attire, he looked more like a leisure traveler. He was similar to many of the adventurers in the mainland. The chains plunged into the ground with a loud thud. The 3 men in black tugged at the chains. The arrowhead at the front of the chains had barbs, tearing up the soil and grass on the ground. The 3 men in black borrowed the force of the pull to leap forward. Clang clang clang, the chains seemed to have eyes of their own. They suddenly changed directions mid-air and chased after Chu Li and the others. Like a snake that had finally bared its fangs, it was about to hunt its prey. Once bitten, even if it was just a single bite, it would be close to hell. Both of Chu Li's feet stomped on the ground as he retreated rapidly. Looking at the sharp end of the chain that was less than half an arm's length away from his feet, he couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. If his reaction had been just a little slower, or if he hadn't retreated far enough, his entire right foot would have been nailed to the ground. He glanced at Gan Xie from the corner of his eyes. He was still the same. Gan Xie's expression didn't change at all. He stood there silently like a lifeless stone pillar. Chu Li was impressed by Gan Xie's determination. Under such circumstances, he could still maintain his stone-like calmness. Chu Li couldn't help but wonder if Gan Xie would still be able to maintain his composure after being struck by the chains. That wasn't right. The Yanjiao people seemed to have told them that Gan Xie couldn't be killed. A chain escaped from the black-clothed man's hand. Like a long black snake under the night sky, it bared its poisonous fangs and went straight for Gan Xie, who was still standing there. To be exact, it was going for Robber 7, who was diagonally behind Gan Xie. When it came to other people, the slave masters prioritized capturing them. If they couldn't capture them, they would kill them. Robber 7, on the other hand, was given the order to kill without mercy by C. That was why they could slowly toy with Chu Li and Gan Xie, but when it came to Robber 7, they would kill him at the first opportunity. Without using any tools, Gan Xie grabbed the chain that brushed past his scalp with his bare hands. The sharp spikes of the chain that was shooting towards Robber 7 stopped a step away from him. It was as if someone had grabbed it by the neck. The spikes at the front of the chain drooped down weakly. On the other end, the black-clothed man tugged at the chain. It wouldn't budge, but he didn't panic. Due to the structure of the chain, it was normal for it to be caught. Not only was he not worried, he even had a mocking smile in his eyes. His other hand moved slightly. At the same time, the other black-clothed man's chain shot towards Gan Xie like a snake. Gan Xie raised his other hand to block the attack of the second chain. However, at the same time, the chain in his hand seemed to have come alive. It struggled and twisted in an S shape. Suddenly, it pulled apart and wrapped around Gan Xie. Mu Fa noticed the situation at Gan Xie's side. He wondered if he should go over and help. However, Xiaido, who was already heading over to help, suddenly retreated away from Gan Xie as if he was avoiding the plague. Not only Mu Fa, even the black-clothed man who was chasing after Xiaido was surprised. What did Xiaido see? When Xiaido noticed Gan Xie's situation, his first reaction was to go over and help. After all, they were all on the same side. Moreover, Bai had one more person than them. If Gan Xie lost his ability to fight, their side would be at a disadvantage. However, just as Xiaido was about to go over, he saw a flash of red in Gan Xie's eyes. It was especially obvious in the darkness of the night. At that moment, Xiaido suddenly remembered that Gan Xie was different from them. The leader of Yanjiao had once told them not to get close to Gan Xie if they saw him in this state. Moreover, Xiaido had personally witnessed Gan Xie killing fearsome beasts during a hunt. Even now, he still had a lingering fear towards Gan Xie. Seeing Xiaido retreat, Chu Li and Lu Zhai seemed to have thought of something and stopped in their tracks. Robber 7, who was watching the battle with great interest, suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't help but shiver. Gan Xie, who was bound by the chain, didn't panic at all. Instead, the strange red glow in his eyes expanded, as if it was about to overflow with viscous blood. Crack! 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 The sound of bones cracking could be heard. Finger bones that were half the length of an arm glowed with a metallic luster as they appeared in Gan Xie's hand. They were like sharp swords that had been unsheathed. Under the moonlight, they flashed with a frightening cold light. A strange roar came from his throat. Sound waves shot out from his long fangs, exploding and spreading in all directions. It was extremely deafening. The chains around Gan Xie's body creaked weakly as if they were about to break in the next second. Sand-yellow flames emitted from Gan Xie's body. Everything around him became cold and dry. The grass under his feet quickly lost its moisture as if it was being baked by the high temperature. It went from fresh green to withered in less than a breath's time. Robber 7, who was closest to Gan Xie, felt his face tighten as if it was about to crack. No amount of cold sweat could relieve it. The 6 men in black stopped abruptly as if their feet were nailed to the ground. Their arched eyebrows were raised as they looked at Gan Xie in shock. Their pupils constricted at the sudden turn of events. They were dumbfounded by the scene in front of them. Which fucking tribe was this? Was this really a human? A half-beastman? No, not a half-beastman. They had captured so many half-beastmen as slaves, but they had never encountered a situation like this. This was not a half-beastman they were familiar with, nor was this a human they were more familiar with. Then, what was this? A monster? It wasn't just the men in black who were stunned. Robber 7, who had been pretending to be calm, was also shocked. Every pore on his body was trembling from extreme uncertainty and suspicion. His heart was screaming for him to get away quickly. The atmosphere suddenly turned cold. Time seemed to have slowed down. Clouds floated in the night sky, covering the 2 incomplete moons. Even the stars were hiding away in fear, appearing dim. The night was even darker. No one moved. The 6 men in black were probably guessing and calculating Gan Xie's threat level in their hearts. Robber 7 looked at the situation in front of him and broke out in cold sweat. Help! Another monster! He suddenly wanted to blow the whistle for help. Being demoted was better than losing his life. But, if he blew the whistle here, would the other robbers be able to hear him? In order to better escape with the chief's bone lock, Robber 7 purposely chose a route with fewer people. He was afraid that even if he blew the whistle until the end, no one would come to save him. At this moment, Robber 7 deeply understood one thing: you won't die if you don't seek death. Chapter 8:22. Robber 7's eyes darted around as he heard the sounds of battle from Xiao Xian's side. He wanted to look in that direction, but his neck didn't seem to listen to him. Perhaps it was his natural reaction. He had to pay attention to the person closest to him who could threaten his life. For example, the strange man with sharp claws and fangs. Crack! Crack! One of the chains around Gan Xie's body was broken by the force of the pull. This seemed to have triggered a chain reaction. Crack! 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 A series of cracking sounds erupted in a short span of time. The metal chains around Gan Xie's body snapped into small pieces and scattered on the ground. The sand-yellow flame around Gan Xie's body seemed to have been pushed away by the shockwave. Countless pieces of grass that flew into the air dried up and fell to the ground like sand. Gan Xie's breathing sounded like a blood-soaked beast swallowing flesh and blood. The red glow in his eyes intensified. His hard and sharp finger bones were like 10 high-quality knives as they scratched against the chains. Sparks flew everywhere as they made a sharp sound. The 6 men in black weren't the only ones who were stunned. Even Si-Du and the others who thought they knew Gan Xie better were stunned. How were these human fingers? It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were made by a master craftsman. Otherwise, how could they create such an effect? Gan Xie firmly held on to the broken chains that were trying to escape. He pulled back and pulled one of the men in black towards him. Before the man could escape, Gan Xie's fingers were already around his neck. He looked like he was going to bite him, but before he could do so, he seemed to have smelled something unpleasant. He threw the man away in disgust as if he was throwing away trash. The man in black who was thrown away crashed into the forest not far away. He broke a few tree trunks that were as thick as a man and fell to the ground. He slid across the grass for a long time before he stopped. He let out a painful cry and couldn't get up for a while. Gan Xie's blood-red eyes didn't even look at whether the man in the forest was dead or alive. He turned and looked at the other man in black. Looking at those blood-red eyes, the man in black's hand that was holding onto the chains trembled. After the clattering of the chains, there was a loud crash, followed by a short scream. Si's eyes flickered, but he did not divert his attention to that direction. Instead, he sprinted towards Xiao Xian. His black robe fluttered as he dashed forward at high speed, shattering countless bits of grass that were flying in the air. The distance between Si and Xiao Xian was not too far. Si's movements were peculiar. Even though he was wielding a long-handled broadsword, he seemed to be gliding over the grass as if he was weightless. Si waved his arms, the long cross-hilted biscuit that resembled a beast's fangs drew an arc in front of him. The sharp she blade seemed to condense a despairing aura of death, as if it wanted to cut off all life. In the blink of an eye, it arrived in front of Xiao Xian. The icy aura of the blade came straight at Xiao Xian. The sound of the wind breaking was strangely sharp, piercing to the ears. Xiao Xian did not try to hide. At a time like this, he had no intention of wasting time with his opponent. He did not want to test his opponent's strength step by step. Instead, he chose to use the Yanjiao style, direct, barbaric, violent, and the most effective way to attack. Highly active totemic power coursed through every part of his body. It was as if there were air bombs exploding on the surface of his body. His aura was violent and ferocious. Clang! The sound of metal clashing was endless. The sparks from the clash of blades were especially eye-catching in the dark night. Every time Xiao Xian took a step forward, the ground beneath his feet would sink with a thunderous rumble. The entire floor seemed to be trembling. The leaves blown by the wind, as well as the soil and grass that were thrown into the air by the tremors, were initially scattered like a drizzle. However, as the two sides clashed again and again, it quickly turned into a violent storm. The vibrant green that was torn apart, the withered yellow that was drained of moisture, and the brown soil that was stained with pebbles were all gloomy under the night sky. Along with the two men's movements, they were wantonly swept away and blown away. C's wide black robes were torn in many places. Every time he waved his hand, a hole would appear. Bam! Xiao Xian once again violently deflected the biscuit that came slashing at him. C used the momentum to retreat. In the brief moment of respite, C's eyebrows were raised like the other men in black. He panted quickly, his narrowed pupils flashing with suspicion. He no longer had the domineering aura that he had before the fight started. More and more, he felt an uncontrollable sense of danger. The strange man guarding Robber 7 was one of them, and the other was the Yanjiao man before him. If it was only a guess at the beginning, he was now completely certain of the man's identity. From the information he gathered, and from what he learned from Ji Fang, there was only one person who fit this man's identity, Yanjiao's Grand Elder, Xiao Xian. Even though C already knew from Ji Fang that Xiao Xian was a dangerous character, the information he heard and understood was far more profound than experiencing it firsthand. How could this tribesman be so strong? However, if that was all there was to it, then there was nothing to worry about. Under the continuous collision of their auras and strength, C felt that he had a rough grasp of Xiao Xian's strength. The moment they collided, C felt as if the bones in his entire arm were about to break. It was as if the one who collided with him was not a human, but a gigantic beast. The Yanjiao man, who was rumored to be as ferocious as a beast, was not to be underestimated. However, under such brute force, he could still win with technique. A calculating glint flashed across C's eyes, but in the next moment, he felt the skin on his back tighten. Before he could think too much, he realized that Xiao Xian was ready to attack again. Again. C's eyes flashed with ruthlessness. His chest and abdomen shrunk back as he retreated quickly to buy himself enough time. Then, he paused abruptly, his right foot stomping on the ground. His body moved with a twist of his waist and knees. With a flip of his palm, the cross-handled shi was tossed into the air. Then, he reached out with both hands to grab the cross-handled shi and spun it. In an instant, the cross-handled shi spun like the blades of a meat grinder. Before the flying leaves could even get close, they were already shattered by the shi's blade aura. Based on Xiao Xian's previous attack power, even if he could hurt C, Xiao Xian himself would have suffered more serious injuries. No one was willing to charge into a meat grinder. Those who charged into the spinning shi would have been ground into minced meat. However, C's guess was wrong. Xiao Xian was even more ferocious than before. For a moment, C wondered if Xiao Xian, this tribesman, was an idiot. C thought his eyes must be playing tricks on him. He seemed to have seen a flash of white light under Xiao Xian's feet. It was fleeting and unclear, like a hazy fog that appeared and disappeared in an instant. Xiao Xian bent his knees slightly and lowered his body, like a beast ready to pounce on its prey in the forest. The next moment, he stomped his feet on the ground, flattening a large patch of grass that was above his knees. The entire patch of ground was lowered by a notch. Xiao Xian, on the other hand, was propelled by a powerful force. His body shot out like an arrow from a crossbow, bringing with it a strong gust of wind that could sweep a giant bear high into the air. His arm wielding the shi's blade slashed out with the force of the impact. The air followed the movement of Xiao Xian's arm, setting off the sound of wind and thunder. The dirt and pebbles on the ground, the grass that was uprooted from the ground, and the flying sand from Gonqia's direction were all pushed to the sides by the surging air waves. It was as if there was a ferocious beast roaring madly inside, chasing them away. There was no dodging, no other tricks. Xiao Xian directly and rudely rushed over. With every step Xiao Xian took, the ground shook. As Xiao Xian ran, the entire area began to shake. It made C feel as if he was stepping on waves, unsteady on his feet. He did not know how to exert his strength. Under such an attack, he could not even execute 30% of his movement techniques. C's heart skipped a beat. Xiao Xian's momentum had exceeded his expectations. The moment he saw Xiao Xian's explosive attack, he knew that he might not be able to block this round of attacks. When a ferocious beast attacked its prey, anyone with a little bit of hunting experience would know how fast and powerful its charge was. Xiao Xian's charge was much stronger than those famous ferocious beasts in the forest. Feeling the power of the blade, C's heart raced uncontrollably. If there was enough light, one would be able to see that C's face was as pale as a sheet. Clang clang clang. Bam bam. Two powerful forces collided. The entire floor felt like it was about to be lifted up. Chu Li, Cai Du, and the rest felt an earthquake beneath their feet. The flying sparks converged into a glaring line of fire, breaking through the darkness. It was as if one's vision was being scorched. The power transmitted from the cross hilt to C's arms instantly spread throughout his body. His arms were numb. TSK TSK. Countless tears appeared on C's black robe. The torn fabric was swept high into the air before being shredded by the surging airflow. C was pushed back dozens of meters. His knees were already sunk into the ground. His hair, disheveled by the wind, stood up diagonally behind him. Before the cold sweat could form, it flew back along his forehead as soon as it appeared. The whirring sound of C's saber stopped. The saber in Xiao Xian's hand was like a steel bar stuck into a spinning fan blade, stopping its rotation. Bam! One of the horizontal bars of C's saber's cross hilt was cut off. The falling horizontal bar hit the ground with a dull thud. It was like a heavy blow to C's chest, making him want to spit out a mouthful of blood. Chu Li and the rest who had avoided the battle due to their inability to hold on looked at Gan Xie who was still torturing C's saber. Then, they looked at Xiao Xian who had chopped off the handle of the legendary C's saber and fell silent. Forget it, all they had to do was protect themselves. They shouldn't add to the chaos. Although they didn't want to admit it, the reality was that Xiao Xian and Gan Xie were monsters on a different level from them. Suddenly, Cai Du's gaze froze. He nudged Lu Zhai who was beside him with his elbow. Speak. Lu Zhai was watching the battle anxiously. He was startled by Cai Du, so his tone was naturally unpleasant. Although there was no need for them to interfere, it was always good to be on guard. He didn't want to listen to Cai Du's nonsense. Look over there. Cai Du pointed at a spot not far behind Gan Xie. Lu Zhai was about to take a quick glance before retracting his gaze. However, when he looked over, his eyes widened in disbelief. He stared hard for 2 seconds before stuttering, where is he? Chu Li and Mu Fa also looked over in confusion. They were equally stunned. All they saw was a cocoon-like ball of rope on the rock where Robber 7 was placed. However, Robber 7, who was originally tied up inside, was nowhere to be seen. They thought that Robber 7 had hidden his head away, so when Gan Xie was almost done torturing C's saber, they took the opportunity to take a closer look. There was no one. It's empty. Chu Li exclaimed. Looking around, Robber 7 was nowhere to be seen. Gan Xie who was in the midst of torturing C's saber, where was that little thief? Chapter 823. Of C's 6 men in black, only 3 were left. Half of them were gone and the remaining 3 were no longer actively attacking. They were all injured to varying degrees and were fully on guard. Their gazes towards Gan Xie were filled with undisguised fear. If not for C's presence and the lack of orders, they would have retreated. Gan Xie wasn't unscathed either. Sharp arrowhead-like objects pierced his body but not a single drop of blood flowed out. Gan Xie didn't seem to notice it either and was unaffected. This put a lot of pressure on Xi's men. They didn't want to meet someone like Gan Xie. Had they known, they would have advised Xi not to attack them. The most despairing thing was when the opponent broke your best and proudest trick. Moreover, it was a direct attack without any other tricks. It made them feel like they were about to break down. Wasn't Xi feeling the same way? The muscles on his arms were still twitching and the fingers holding the hilt were trembling. His black robe was in tatters and he looked like a beggar. Ever since Xi took over as the leader of Xi, he had never been in such a sorry state. However, his physical injuries weren't as severe as the psychological impact. There was a flattened protrusion where his fingers held the hilt. There used to be a horizontal bar there. The cross-shaped long-handled shi was a weapon modified according to the writing of the character, Min. The cross-shaped long handle symbolized the frame used to tie slaves. In the shi organization, the guilty slaves would be tied to the cross-shaped frame and burned or punished in other ways. But now, the long hilt in Xi's hand was just a straight rod. Both ends were cut off by Xiao Xian. The vertical hilt was connected to a large shi. From afar, it looked more like a scythe. Xi regretted it now. Why didn't he listen to Ji Fang? He shouldn't have attacked when he knew his opponent's identity. What was the most important thing in a war? Information. Xi's understanding of Xiao Xian was limited. The Yi family, who had suffered a great loss, would never divulge Xiao Xian's affairs to outsiders. After all, it was the family's shame. Not many in the tribe knew about it, let alone outsiders. As a result, Hui, who was used to being tyrannical, had his ambitions inflated. When he extended his claws to another continent and was about to make a big profit, he met a tough opponent and even made a move. Back then, when Xi extended his claws and fangs to another continent, this was what he had in mind. I'll capture a few of you as my slaves. Do you think you can just cross the ocean and attack me? In fact, Yan Jiao really dared. Not only did he come over, but he also brought quite a number of people with him. Before he made his move tonight, Xi thought, I asked you guys to hand over Robber 7 but you guys refused. Don't blame me for making my move. Capture them all as slaves and kill anyone who resists. You won't even have the chance to regret it. However, reality proved that Xi was wrong again. He personally took action with his trusted subordinates who were experienced in capturing slaves. Despite having an advantage in numbers, he was defeated so badly that even his cross-shaped handle was sliced into a stick. This wasn't just because of Xiao Xian's strength. At the same time, it was also because of the knife in Xiao Xian's hand. During the fight, Xi saw a cloud pattern on the knife. However, the fight was too fast and Xiao Xian's attacks were too fierce. There wasn't enough light so Xi didn't have the time to take a closer look. However, with just one glance, Xi was certain that the knife in Xiao Xian's hand was made by one of the Gongjia family's craftsmen. Who in the Gongjia family made it? He had to go to the Gongjia family and ask for the truth. Xi's heart was filled with haze. His mind was filled with all sorts of thoughts. The muscles on his face twitched and his expression contorted. His eyes were filled with hatred but in the end, his rationality won out. He chose to retreat. If this were to continue, forget about his 3 subordinates, even Xi himself would be in grave danger. It was rare for the leader of the #1 slave trading organization to choose to back down. Moreover, he was forced to back down. Retreat! Xi roared indignantly. Finally, Xi gave the order to retreat. The 3 injured men in black heaved a sigh of relief. Without further delay, they kept their chains and left. Finally, they didn't have to face that monster. Xi and his men came and left in a hurry. Chase? Gan Xie asked. No need, Xiao Xian sheathed his knife and looked at the rock where Robber 7 had been. Only a rope cocoon was left there. He escaped, Gan Xie blamed himself. He was too focused on tormenting Robber 7 just now that the slippery robber had escaped. He was too arrogant. He thought that after his body became like this, no one could escape his nose. Even if there was only the slightest trace of blood, he would still be able to smell it. No one could escape from him. However, Robber 7 had tricked him and successfully escaped right under his nose. Robber 7 had changed the smell of his sweat to avoid C's tracking insects. He had also changed the smell of his blood to avoid Gan Xie's detection. Moreover, Robber 7 didn't change completely all of a sudden. Instead, he quietly changed while Gan Xie was fighting with the men in black. Then, when no one was paying attention, he escaped at full speed. The inside of the rope cocoon was wet. Robber 7's sweat and blood were left on it. Hence, Gan Xie could sense the scent of Robber 7 there all along. Robber 7 had escaped when no one was paying attention. What do we do now? Mu Fa asked Xiao Xian. Mu Fa, Ci Du, Chu Li, Lu Zhai, you guys go back first and follow the team to the royal city, Xiao Xian said. You and Gan Xie aren't going back. Are you guys going after that robber? Ci Du asked. No, Xiao Xian denied, we're not going after Robber 7. We're going after C. Xiao Xian's answer made Mu Fa's eyebrows twitch. He didn't ask any more questions. Although he was wary of Xiao Xian in the past, it wasn't as deep as it was now. To be able to force C to retreat was far beyond Mu Fa's expectations. At the same time, this also strengthened Mu Fa's resolve and confidence to work with Yanjiao. He was a wise and great leader of the long boat. Everything he did was for the tribe's benefit. He would choose any path that could make the tribe stronger and go further. Obviously, joining the Flaming Horn tribe was indeed a good choice. After Mu Fa and the others left, Gan Xie cut open the rope cocoon that Robber 7 was tied up in. He carefully identified the scent inside, not missing a single detail. I was too careless. This was the first time Gan Xie encountered such a situation. However, there wouldn't be a next time. If he met Robber 7 again, he wouldn't let Robber 7 use this method to escape. Not long after Xiao Xian and Gan Xie left, the sky began to brighten. The sun replaced the moon and shrouded the land. Gradually, there were more and more noises. A group of traders passed by and looked at the scene in front of them cautiously. This wasn't the first time they had taken this route. Even if they couldn't remember every detail of the route, they could still roughly describe what it was like. However, the scene before them was completely different from what they remembered. Sand. Since when was there sand here? Did I remember wrongly? One of the travelers asked hesitantly. I don't remember there being sand here either. You're all right. The leader gripped his sword and walked towards the sand. Although it wasn't sand, it looked as if it had been affected by a natural disaster. It was a ghastly sight. This reminded those who had experienced the disaster of the natural disaster. They couldn't forget the horrible memory no matter how hard they tried. When they finally stepped onto the sand, the leader kicked something. He used his sword to push the sand away, revealing a dark arrowhead-shaped object. It's Bayan. This was a tool Bayan used to set up a trap. He looked around and found that there were many more of these things. It was definitely Bayan. Who has fought with the buyer here? Why didn't they have the time to collect the items? He looked up into the distance. The trees nearby had already withered. There wasn't a single leaf on the branches. The branches looked as if they would break at the slightest touch. In the distance, although there were still some trees with green leaves, they were more or less yellowed. When the wind blew, many leaves would fall. Taking a deep breath, the leader walked back to the group with wobbly legs. We need to be extra careful on this trip. Don't be careless. The leader's low and stern voice trembled slightly. No matter who Bayan had fought with to create such a situation, it wasn't someone they could afford to mess with. They would avoid them if they could. He was prepared to give up on this trip if he noticed anything amiss. On the other side, Mu Fa and the others caught up with the main group. Xiao Xian and Caesar went after Si. He said to ask Caesar to keep an eye on the surroundings at night. Caesar can see things we can't. It's safer. Mu Fa relayed Xiao Xian's instructions to Gigu. The longboat tribe surrounded Mu Fa and asked, "Boss, what's the legendary Si like? Is he very powerful? I heard that his knife is very strange. It was made by a long-dead Gongjia craftsman. No one else in this world can make it." Mu Fa's expression was complicated. He wanted to say something but didn't know where to start. Chu Li and Ci Du were the same. They found it funny and depressing. However, when they thought about it, they felt much better because they were on the same side. Anyway, they weren't enemies. That was good enough. Lu Zhai chased away the people who surrounded them and asked Gigu in a low voice, "Do you still have it?" "Of course, I've been carrying it with me." Gigu opened the animal skin bag containing the chief's bone lock, intending to take out the item. However, as soon as his hand reached in, Gigu's expression froze. He took it out and took out a piece of broken stone. He immediately had a bad feeling. He flipped through the bag. Nothing. He took it out again. There really wasn't anything. Gigu opened the animal skin bag to its fullest and flipped it upside down. He widened his eyes and looked into the bag as if he wanted to scan every inch of it 100 times. However, the truth was that the item in the bag was really gone. One look at Gigu's expression and Lu Zhai knew what the result was. However, with the precedent of Robert 7 sneaking away under their noses, it wasn't so strange to see Gigu again. They were even surprised that Xiao Xian could predict this. "Before we came, Elder Xiao Xian said that if Robber 7 steals the item back, there's no need to look for it," said Lu Zhai. Unfortunately, without the chief's bone lock, they had one less bargaining chip. At the same time, Robber 7 was lying on a tree branch with his legs crossed. He looked proud and praised himself for being so smart. Not only did he manage to escape, he even managed to steal the item back. When he thought about Yanjiao going to the royal city, Robber 7 decided not to go to the royal city for the time being. That way, he wouldn't meet those Yanjiao people. Yes, he definitely wouldn't meet any Yanjiao people. After the hypnosis, Robber 7 started to doze off. He started dreaming about being one of the top 3 robbers. Chapter 824. Chang'e's leader, Su Li, had been rather idle lately. After delivering Yanjiao's letter, to avoid being treated as a messenger, Su Li quickly left the royal city after delivering the letter to Ji Fang. He even ran quite a distance away. He wanted to go to the royal city to watch the show, but Yanjiao's team hadn't arrived yet, had they? He'd have to wait for Yanjiao's team to arrive before heading to the royal city. However, other than Yanjiao's trip to the royal city, there was nothing else to be happy about. Hence, Su Li was bored out of his wits. He pondered about where he could find some entertainment. Even if there wasn't, he'd create some. Unexpectedly, before he could even move, he sensed someone heading his way at high speed. Su Li's carefree demeanor was gone as he looked in that direction cautiously. Soon, the wariness in his eyes faded and was replaced by intense suspicion. Not long after, a black figure appeared like the wind. It was Si. "Yo!" Su Li was about to greet an old acquaintance when he saw him. It was the usual greeting, but Si was like a ferocious beast whose tail had been stepped on. He roared, "Yo, your ancestor!" Si didn't stop after his roar. He left like a gust of wind, the air current he stirred up messing up Su Li's unkempt hair. Si's roar left Su Li confused. He wanted to ask jokingly, "Old Si, where are you going in such a hurry? Are you chasing after a slave?" However, he only managed to utter a single word before Si looked flustered and exasperated. Angry my ass. But, Su Li rubbed his chin thoughtfully as he watched Si leave like he was running for his life. Although Si ran very fast, he had good eyesight. He could roughly make out Si's appearance. When Si passed by earlier, he was holding a cross-shaped hilt. Now, it had turned into a vertical pole. If it wasn't for the large she blade with the engravings of an eye, he wouldn't have recognized it as Si's iconic cross-shaped hilt she blade. The hilt of the she blade had been chopped off. Was the leader of the #1 slave organization in trouble? Who could kill Si? Just as he was thinking, Su Li sensed that someone was coming from behind. He turned around and his expression froze for a few seconds. Then, he suddenly jumped back and looked at Xiao Xian warily. One of his fingers was already curled, ready to whistle and summon his long-winged bird to escape. Nothing good ever came out of running into Yanjiao people. Why are you here? Su Li continued, I'm not here to deliver the letter. I have something to do, so I'll take my leave first. As if he was afraid that Xiao Xian would open his mouth, Su Li called the long-winged bird over, jumped onto its back, and sped away like a mouse meeting a cat. Xiao Xian. I haven't even said a word. Meanwhile, the fleeing Si was cursing Xiao Xian 1,000 times in his heart. He was crazy. Wasn't it just because he said something wrong and made a move, he was being chased endlessly? When would these days of being on the run end? It was Si's first experience of running from place to place. After the fight that night, Si had temporarily given up on the idea of going head-to-head with the Yanjiao people. Who knew that Xiao Xian would chase after him with no intention of giving up? At first, Si was still thinking about revenge. However, after days of being chased by Xiao Xian, Si changed his mind. He would listen to Ji Fong from now on and stay as far away from Yanjiao as possible. That way, he wouldn't be chased down by the crazy Yanjiao people if he accidentally gave the wrong order. After running from place to place, Si finally chose to go to the royal city to look for Ji Fong to solve this problem. If he had known that messing with the Yanjiao people would end up in such a sorry state, he would never have sent his men to Yanjiao territory to capture him. Royal City, inside the palace. Ji Fong's eyelids twitched. He had a bad feeling about this. After some thought, Ji Fong asked the person beside him, judging by the time, Yanjiao should be here soon, right? They'll reach the royal city in 3 days, someone whispered beside Ji Fong. Ji Fong thought about the deployment he made after receiving Su Li's letter. After the Yanjiao people arrived, the royal city shouldn't be in trouble. 2 more days passed. The atmosphere in the royal city was exceptionally solemn. Although the royal city's atmosphere had been strange ever since the increase of patrols in the royal city, it was nothing compared to today. It was as if the entire royal city's army was on high alert. The citizens of the royal city had a hunch that something big was about to happen a few days ago. However, after 2 days, they saw nothing. Instead, their guesses and discussions intensified. It wasn't that no one said the Yanjiao people were coming, but the reaction of the people of the royal city was different from those of the other cities. What? The Yanjiao people were coming? The Yanjiao person who beat up Lubi and crippled the previous head of the Lu family? He's coming again. Great! Great! There's going to be a good show. After the city gate was destroyed, it took a long time to fix it. Who knew what would happen this time? This was the thought of the royal city's spectators who lacked entertainment. However, the people in the shops and caravans had a different thought. According to the news, the Yanjiao people were a bunch of idiots with a lot of money. Great! When they arrive, they'll make a fortune out of them. Yanjiao's arrival was the hottest topic in the royal city. There were even rumors that Yanjiao was coming to the royal city to settle down. If that happened, the Lu and Fox families would be in trouble. Because of Yanjiao, the royal city's people didn't even care about the Yi family. As for the large and small families in the royal city, they all had different thoughts. The Lu and Fox families were the leaders. Everyone knew that these two families had conflicts with Yanjiao. The Linlu and Fox tribes wanted to stop Xiao Xian but were beaten so badly that they couldn't even lift their heads. The royal city's people still remembered the Lu family's head being slapped over the city gate and sent flying over their heads. As for the Fox tribe, they were forced to move into the royal city in the middle of winter. They lacked a bit of confidence and were still unable to gain a foothold in the royal city. No one hated Yanjiao as much as they did. The fall of the Yi family's golden thigh was one disaster after another, causing them to be in an even more difficult situation. That was why when they heard that the flaming horns were coming again, the two families came together to discuss this matter. They even bribed the guards at the city gates and sent many people to guard the city gates. It would be best if they could give the flaming horns a show of strength. They didn't know how many people Yanjiao was coming, but they thought that since they had to cross the sea and travel such a long distance to get to the royal city, there wouldn't be many of them. They would be exhausted and unable to fight. It was the perfect time to strike. This time, they planned to use Yanjiao as a stepping stone to show off their strength. I heard that Yanjiao's people will be here today. Lu Ming's eyes were sinister. He still remembered the humiliation from back then. Even now, the black bears would mock them whenever they saw them. I wonder if Yanjiao's Xiao Xian will be coming too. Lubi stood there like a bear. With the hammer in his hand, he cast a huge shadow. Back then, Xiao Xian had stolen Lubi's hammer in front of everyone and even chased after him. It was a thorn in Lubi's heart. Now, he was much stronger than before. His talent was incomparable. Even the boss of the Black Bears, Baimi, didn't want to fight Lubi head-on. In a head-on fight, this talented Lu family prodigy had the upper hand. On the city gate tower, a young man in armor looked into the distance. This type of armor was worn by the leaders of the guards. But if one looked closely, they would see that the sword in his hand had a grain leaf pattern on it. It was the Ji family's emblem. Someone walked up and looked at the Lu family below. He asked the young man in armor, "Are you sure you don't want to tell them the truth?" "No need. They'll know soon enough." The young man didn't even spare the Lu family and Fox people a glance. In the courtyard of the Black Bears, the two brothers, Mao Jin and Mao Da, were brushing the fur of the bear pulling the cart. The other was playing with the bear with a stick stained with beast blood. The black bear pulling the carriage roared and chased after the wooden stick with its jaws wide open. Although it looked fierce, it was just playing around. Even when Mao Da hit its nose with the wooden stick, it only shrunk its neck and twitched its ears, growling in protest. "Boss, what do you think Yanjiao is here for?" Mao Jin asked. Nearby, Baimi shook his head. "I don't know. Do you think Xiao Xian will come?" Mao Jin asked again. "Probably." As he said that, the black bear that was chasing after the wooden stick paused. The round ears on its head twitched, and it stopped staring at the wooden stick in Mao Da's hand. Instead, it stood up in a direction as if it wanted to see something. However, it was surrounded by walls and houses that were taller than it. It could not see further. "What's wrong?" Mao Da waved the stick in his hand. The black bear didn't even look at it. Instead, it looked anxious. He exchanged a look with Mao Jin and immediately threw down the stick and brush in his hand. He leaped onto the roof and looked in the direction of Royal City's gates. In the distance, a wolf howled. Even though it was far away and Royal City was noisy, the sound still reached their ears. Baimi's expression changed. He had been through a lot. He could tell something from the howl. "It's coming from outside the gates." Mao Da stood on the roof and craned his neck. He could only see the taller walls on the other side of the gates. "There are patrols heading that way," Mao Jin said excitedly. "They're here. They must be Yanjiao's men." "But what was that howl?" Mao Da asked. "We'll know when we see." Baimi strode out of the courtyard. Mao Da and Mao Jin hurried after him. It wasn't just the black bears. There was a commotion all over Royal City. The wolf howl that came from outside the city made many people who were chatting in the city quiet down for a while. Then, there was an even louder discussion. Many curious people who liked to watch the show decisively put down what they were doing and rushed to the city gate. The Yi family. Those who had been protected by Yi Tuan during the battle with Yi Xiang and those who had survived the chaos to protect the Yi family all paled. He's here. He's here again. Chapter 825. Gigu looked at the royal city in front of him, deep in thought. The royal city, as expected of the royal city. It was like an ancient giant beast lying there. Even if it didn't make a sound, one could still feel its powerful and majestic aura. It was as if it would swallow everyone and everything that came here in the next moment. There was a sense of urgency in the air that suppressed everything. Those who came here for the first time couldn't help but feel a sense of fear. Because of the slave masters and Zheng Luo's description, Gigu had never liked the people here, especially those from the royal city. He hated them. But he had to admit that the royal city was indeed huge. It was not comparable to the cities they passed by on their way here. There was always a reason to be strong. Logically speaking, as the leader of a tribe, Gigu had to learn from this experience. This is the royal city. There were many people who had the same thought as Gigu. Many of them thought that the Flaming River trading point was already big enough. It was beyond their imagination. It was the biggest trading point they had ever seen in their lives. But now, they realized that they did not know how big the world was until they came here. Gigu finally understood why Xiao Xian asked them to come to the royal city. If they didn't come here, many of the Yanjiao people who were already full of themselves would not recognize reality. It was better to let them see it for themselves. Most of the people who came this time were born and raised on the other side of the continent. There was still a gap between them and Zheng Luo's group. They had learned a lot from this trip. Yanjiao was moving too fast. Many people's ambitions could not keep up with their willpower. After they woke up, they still had a long way to go. Can our Flaming River trading point reach this scale in the future? Ao asked. Our Grand Elder said we can, Tuo said confidently. The trading point was in the process of expansion. As the Flaming River Alliance continued to expand, the trading point would continue to expand. Although they also wanted to expand to the size of King's City in one go, overestimating themselves would create a feeling of exaggeration. It was better to be solid and steady. The shamans had all said that military force, population, and the will of the people were all things that had to be considered. Even if he could not see that day, he believed that the day of Yanjiao would come. Gigu smirked. That's good. I think so too. With that said, he raised his arm and swung it down. Crackle, in front of the royal city, on the open plains, 6 totem flags were carried forward in a row, fluttering in the wind. Why 6 totem flags? Back then, there were only 3 flags in Chao Chiu Cheng, Yanjiao's double-horn totem flag, the Flaming River Alliance's dragon flag, and the Longboat tribe's totem flag. But this time, on the way to the royal city, the Hui tribe, Mang tribe, and 8 Limbs tribe had gathered together and thought about it. No matter how they thought about it, they felt that they had lost out. Although not many of their tribes came this time, this was a good opportunity to use Yanjiao's power to make their presence known. It would be a pity to give it up. However, the totem flag was not something that could be easily made. In the end, they thought of a compromise. They would not draw the totem flag in the name of their tribe, but in the name of a small group of people. There would be a difference in the production of the totem flag, but the slave masters and tribesmen here did not understand the rules of the tribes on the other side of the sea. As long as they let others see the totem flag, they would know that people from this tribe had come here before. It would not be in vain for them to come here with the flaming horns. Ta held the Yanjiao totem flag and poked the flagpole into the ground. With a bang, a large amount of dust and grass flew up from the ground. He let go of the flag, and the totem flag quietly stood on the ground. Stretching his arms, Ta and Ao silently communicated with each other. As a team leader who led hunting teams into the forest all year round, Ta could clearly feel the hostility from the city gate. It would not be easy for them to enter the city gate of King City. Was he afraid? Of course not. After stretching his arms, Ta grabbed the flagpole again and pulled it out from the ground. The sound of the totem flag hitting the ground had also brought everyone back to their senses from the shock of seeing King City. However, at this moment, when they saw the totem flag fluttering in the wind, they no longer had any fear in their hearts. Was the royal city scarier than the fearsome beast forest? They were not afraid of the fearsome beast forest, so what was there to be afraid of in the royal city? Plus, they all believed that one day, the Flaming River trading point would surpass the royal city. Wherever the two horns pointed, they would succeed. Perhaps it was because of the change in the Yanjiao people's mentality and morale, the other tribesmen also gradually adjusted their mentality. Indeed, what was there to be afraid of? Plus, if anything happened, the Yanjiao people would take the lead. The horn from the city gate sounded after a long howl. The people at the city gate had already begun to move. The royal city guard's armor glowed with a golden light. Seeing this, many people followed their leaders forward while stretching their arms and legs. The swords, axes, and hammers in their hands seemed to be thirsty for blood. Some people even roared excitedly as they moved forward. Looking at their posture, those who didn't know better would think that they were really going to attack the city. Actually, it wasn't just the tribesmen who were shocked by the royal city. The royal city guards were also shocked by these people. Looking at the approaching group, they couldn't help but feel a layer of goosebumps. Even though there were many people in this group who might not be as strong as them in terms of martial prowess, at this moment, in this place, these people seemed to have twisted together into an aura that could sweep away 1,000 soldiers in an instant. On this continent, perhaps only a trained army or a few tribes that lived far away in the mountains could achieve such a feat. This was the advantage of these tribesmen who had just merged with their fire seed. They were united and the influence of their fire seed was still present. Among the guards at the city gate, Lu Ming looked at the approaching group and gulped. So many people. And where were the others from? Didn't they say only Yanjiao? Why were there so many flags with totems? If they didn't borrow the power of the royal city, with just the Lu family and the Fox people, even if they could win, it would not be easy. The Lu family was still hesitating, but the Fox people were already thinking of retreating. Even though the Yanjiao tribesmen only knew Xiao Xian, they were familiar with Yanjiao's fire seed aura and style. That was why when they saw the numbers, the cunning Fox tribesmen did not want to fight head-on. The Lu family should be the one to deal with the Flaming Horn tribe. It was a difficult task. The armored youth on the city gate tower looked at the approaching group and hesitated. He did not go down to greet them. It wasn't that he didn't dare, he just wanted to observe the situation first. Remembering his brother Ji Fang's words, the armored youth searched the approaching group but did not find the person he was looking for. Where was Yanjiao's Xiao Xian? They said they were here to negotiate with Yanjiao. The most important person was Yanjiao's Xiao Xian. If not for Xiao Xian, Ji Fang would not be so afraid of Yanjiao. Just as he was thinking, the cry of an eagle came from the sky. It was not the ones in the sky, but an eagle flying from another direction. It swooped down towards the group heading for the city gate. A figure jumped down from the eagle's back and landed at the front of the group. The armored youth on the city gate tower noticed that when that person appeared, the troops heading towards King City fell silent. Even the roars stopped at the same time. The leaders also looked at that person, as if they were waiting for something. That's Yanjiao's Xiao Xian, the armored youth asked. That's him, someone beside the armored youth replied in a low voice. Xiao Xian's appearance lessened the pressure on Gigu and the others. Scanning the group, Xiao Xian looked at the city gate not far away and gestured for them to stop. It was not just the Yinzhou people. The other tribes, including the Long Boat and the Mang tribe, stopped as well. None of them objected, and there was no dissatisfaction on their faces. This was not an act. This discovery made the armored youth squint his eyes. He looked at Xiao Xian and pondered. Xiao Xian scanned the royal city gate, and his eyes stopped on Lubi. Although Yanzhao's group exceeded their expectations, Lubi did not care. His target was Xiao Xian, who had just appeared. His eyes were filled with hatred as he stared at Xiao Xian. The muscles on his face were twisted together, making him look ferocious. That day, it was Xiao Xian who stole his hammer in front of everyone and chased after him to beat him up. He was a famous genius of the Lu family in the royal city. Today, he came with a vengeance. No matter what other people thought, Lubi's goal was clear. Revenge. Xiao Xian naturally noticed the intense stares. He did not say anything and walked straight towards Lubi and the others. There was no roar, no release of aura, and no change in the ground beneath his feet. Every step he took brought up a small amount of dust particles. This did not seem like an extremely dangerous ferocious beast approaching, but more like an ordinary person walking on the ground. However, Lubi, who was facing Xiao Xian, felt as if there was a mountain pressing down on him. He wanted to roar, to release all his strength, to avenge his humiliation. However, he helplessly realized that it was useless. He was like a torch that was about to burn, but the air around him was suddenly sealed. He had nowhere to release his aura, so he had no choice but to hold it back. Lubi, who was standing there with his hammer that could shield him from the sun and rain, had his fierce aura suppressed. He wanted to activate the fire seed's power in his blood, but he realized that the power seemed to be on strike. It was as if it was purposely avoiding something, unwilling to move. You. How is this possible? Lubi's eyes were filled with disbelief. The hammer in his hand was even bigger than the one Xiao Xian took from the Gongjia family. However, it was only in Lubi's hand now. Lubi's arm trembled, causing the hammer to vibrate weakly. So what if he could not swing the hammer? Many people did not understand why Lubi was behaving like this. Wasn't he the one who wanted to teach Yanzhao's Xiao Xian a lesson a few days ago? Why was Xiao Xian standing right in front of him and Lubi could not even swing the hammer? No one knew how Lubi felt. His scalp was about to explode. His back was drenched in sweat and he was terrified. He even wanted to run away. He saw a ball of fire in Xiao Xian's eyes. A ball of white fire. Chapter 826. Lubi's tall and sturdy body trembled. His eyes could no longer hide the panic, shock, and fear in them. He wanted to avoid Xiao Xian's gaze but his legs refused to listen to him. Lubi even thought that if he forced himself to move, he would lose his balance and fall. He didn't need to think too much to know what would happen to him if he fell in front of these tribesmen from the distant continent. Weighing the pros and cons, Lubi chose to grit his teeth and stay put. Noticing Lubi's unusual behavior, the other Lu family members wanted to get closer to see what was going on. However, as soon as they moved, Xiao Xian's gaze fell on them. It was as if a bucket of ice water had been poured over their heads. The Lu family felt their hair stand on end as they met Xiao Xian's gaze. The slightest movement would cause them to shiver. Even though many of them were still far away from Xiao Xian, they could feel an inexplicable shudder that seemed to come from their bones. Or rather, it was a problem with the source of their strength. What was going on? The man on the tower had been watching the commotion below. He could tell that something was wrong. If he continued to watch, the Lu family would be humiliated. Although he did not like the Lu family's style, they were now the guards of the royal city. If they were humiliated, it would be humiliating for the royal city. Especially in front of these tribesmen, he could not afford to mess things up. He thought the Lu family would at least hold on for a little longer. What a pity. Sighing silently, the armored youth jumped down from the tower and landed behind Lubi. Xiao Xian looked over, unsurprised by his appearance. Ji family. Xiao Xian could feel the aura of the Ji family from him. This person looked similar to Ji Fang, but compared to Ji Fang's calmness, this person was more arrogant. However, in front of Xiao Xian, the arrogance on his face lessened, and his eyes became more cautious. Ji Shou of the Ji family is here to welcome you, said Ji Shou. He was the leader of the royal city's guards and one of the few surviving Ji Fang's ascension to the throne. Ji Shou was Ji Fang's biological brother and had contributed greatly to Ji Fang's ascension. As Ji Shou spoke, he met Xiao Xian's eyes and paused. He finally understood why the Lu family members were acting like this. They were under immense pressure. What Ji Shou did not know was that Xiao Xian had restrained himself after Ji Shou's appearance. Due to Ji Fang's appearance, Xiao Xian looked away. The Lu family, including Lubi, felt their bodies lighten as if a mountain had been lifted from their shoulders. Some of them wiped the cold sweat off their foreheads, secretly relieved that Ji Shou had appeared in time or they wouldn't have been able to hold on. These Yanjiao people were really strange. Ji Shou was different from the rest of the Lu family. The power of the fire seed in his body was stronger. After a short pause, he recovered. In the primitive times, the Ji family's fire seed would have been stronger than the Lu family's. Ji Shou could resist Xiao Xian's pressure. They had been stuck at the city gates for a long time. Ji Shou did not waste time and gestured for Xiao Xian to enter. Open the gates. Ji Shou said. Everyone, please. Xiao Xian stepped into the city first. Gigu followed behind him with the group. Ji Shou watched the group pass and narrowed his eyes, trying his best to hide the sharpness in them. These tribesmen were indeed different from what he had expected. The results of the Lu family's test meant that he had to treat them seriously. It was rare for him to say, please. After all the flaming horns had entered the city, Ji Shou looked at the stunned Lu family with disdain, then at the fox people who were hiding far away. He chuckled and hurried into the city, not caring about the Lu family and the fox people's reactions. The city gates were no longer closed after the Yanjiao group entered the city. Traffic in and out of the royal city resumed. But the Lu family did not have it easy. Thinking of the situation at that time, their hearts were filled with lingering fear, and a chill ran down their spines. Lubi watched in a daze as the group walked away. His grip loosened and the hammer fell to the ground with a thud. Lubi seemed to have completely collapsed as he struggled to support his body. Lu Ming, who was not far from Lubi, fell to his knees with a thud. They understood Ji Shou's gaze and smile when he left. They were finished. On the other side, the group that had followed Xiao Xian into the royal city walked along the wide road that led directly to the palace. They looked curiously at the royal city troops who were maintaining order on both sides. At the same time, they studied the onlookers, the buildings, and the furnishings of the shops around them. The roads in the royal city were much wider than those in Chaoqiu City. Caesar and his group did not find it crowded at all. Large beasts often walked around the royal city. However, this road was not open to just anyone. Travelers and caravans usually took other routes into the city. Those who walked on this road were given special treatment. Can you tell? Gue, he asked Tua, who was beside him. What? Tua was observing the situation in King City when Gue he suddenly asked such a question. He did not know how to react. The reaction of the people in King City is different from the reaction of the people in the other cities we have seen, Gue he said. Tua thought for a moment. Indeed, the people in the royal city seemed to be looking for entertainment. They were like monkeys in the crowd, watching the Yanjiao group with interest. They were not as guarded as the people in Chaoqiu City. Back then, only a few hundred people had entered Chaoqiu City. Now, all of them had entered the royal city. Even though there were many Yanjiao people, some of the royal city people were shocked at first sight. But they quickly returned to watching the fun. Why? This was the royal city's confidence. This was the royal city's confidence and power. Those who could stay in the royal city were all capable. The Fox tribe had been arrogant in the forest back in the day. Even though the tribe had suffered great losses from the king beast incident at the salt mine, at least there were still people in the tribe. Together, they were a powerful force. However, in the royal city, they could not do much. All they could do was suppress the free people or small organizations. The only reason they could be so arrogant until now was because they were riding on the coattails of the Yi family. Once the Yi family fell, the people who had been suppressed by the Fox tribe would take revenge. The free people and small organizations in the royal city had nothing to fear. They were not afraid of the Yanjiao group. Plus, even if the Yi family had fallen, there were still the other 5 aristocratic families. What were they afraid of? As the Yanjiao group made their way to the palace, an uninvited guest arrived at the Gongjia residence. Tell Gongjia Heng to come out. A man dressed in black stood in the great hall, exuding a murderous aura. The current leader of the Gongjia family was Gongjia Heng. Ever since Ji Fang took over, Gongjia Heng's status in the family had skyrocketed. Plus, Gongjia Heng was capable and had just returned from his studies at Gongjia Mountain. After comparing the craftsman's products, the elders of the Gongjia family had acknowledged Gongjia Heng's position. At the same time, this was the best choice for the Gongjia family. Gongjia Heng had been in closed-door cultivation recently. Unless there was an emergency, no one would disturb him. This was not just Gongjia Heng's rule, it was a habit of all the Gongjia family's craftsmen and craftsmen. No one wanted to be disturbed by a trivial matter during their craftsman's work. When it came to crafting, a life-changing inspiration could vanish like smoke in the wind. They might not be able to recall it for the rest of their lives. At this moment, the Gongjia family had an uninvited guest. This was someone the Gongjia family did not want to welcome but did not dare offend. Where's Gongjia Heng? Tell him to come out right now. Another suppressed roar caused everyone in the room to tremble. They were afraid, but because of their profession, they couldn't help but glance at the other party's weapon. Those who knew where the weapon came from felt their hearts skip a beat. How did the cross-shaped handle end up like this? The fracture looked strange. If they did not look closely, they would not be able to tell. They were curious but they did not want to get involved. The person standing in the Gongjia family's great hall was Si, who had been chased all the way here by Xiao Xian. However, Si had changed into a new set of clothes so he did not look as pathetic. There were not many people who dared to disrespect the Gongjia family like this and this person was one of them. The Gongjia family and Si had been working together since the Gongjia family's ancestors. Every year, the Gongjia family needed rare materials. Part of it was from this man. After all, Ji had nothing but slaves. He had enough manpower to mine and search for things. Si's cross-shaped shi knife was made by the Gongjia family's craftsman. However, the senior who made it had passed away a long time ago. The craftsman might not be able to replicate the craftsmanship and techniques used. It would be difficult to repair it. The more skilled the Gongjia family's craftsmen were, the more serious their OCD was. If they could not repair the knife perfectly, they would rather not do it. Otherwise, not only would their reputation be damaged, they would also be unhappy for a long time. Si had interacted with many Gongjia family members and knew how they were like. That was why he went straight to Gongjia Heng to ask for an explanation. He knew that some of the Gongjia family members had left after Ji Fang took over. He was here to ask if his cross-shaped shi knife could be repaired. If it continued like this, he would lose face. To avoid people, he snuck into the royal city and went to Ji Fang's place before heading straight to the Gongjia family. His other goal was to find out who in the Gongjia family was the one who forged those threatening weapons for the Flaming Horn tribe. "Where's Heng? Get him out here!" C roared impatiently. "What are you yelling for?" Heng was not without a temper after being interrupted in the middle of his work. However, the moment he entered, he saw the she knife in C's hand. His eyes were glued to it. "Your knife, let me see." Chapter 827. Seeing that Heng had finally come out, C did not waste any time. He tossed the she blade he had shaved into a stick at Heng. The she blade was still quite heavy. Although it had been shaved, it was still heavy for a regular person. However, as a blacksmith, Heng's arm strength was incomparable to a regular person's. After catching the she blade firmly, he did not even look at C as he studied it carefully. The other Gongjia family members did not care anymore. They all gathered around to study the she blade's fracture. The people who were still in the hall were all people of some status in the family. They were Heng's trusted aides, so C was not afraid of them spreading rumors. He allowed them to study it. This fracture. Heng rubbed his finger back and forth, carefully feeling the surface of the fracture. His eyes did not miss a single detail. To be able to create such a fracture, the other party's weapon must be very sharp and hard. The force of the blow must have been very strong too. Most importantly, he did not know what material it was made of. From the fracture, Heng could tell that the weapon used to break the handle was not a material he was familiar with. This piqued Heng's curiosity. He asked C, "Tell me about what happened." C refused to recall what happened. He would not describe how Xiao Xian had shaved him to the Gongjia family. He could not wait to hide this embarrassing incident. How could he tell anyone? "It's fine if you don't want to talk. Tell me what the weapon looks like." Heng thought back to all the weapons he had encountered. None of them could create a fracture like this. The marks on it were very unfamiliar. "You don't know?" C glanced at Heng and the other blacksmiths with a strange expression. He really could not describe what Xiao Xian's blade looked like. "It's a blade. I didn't notice it at the time, but I know it has the Gongjia family's cloud pattern on it. There's no mistaking it." Among the Gongjia family members who left, who went to Yanjiao? Yanjiao. The one who broke the she blade was Xiao Xian from Yanjiao, asked Heng. "Yes, you know Xiao Xian. Right, I heard that Xiao Xian from Yanjiao once came to Royal City and asked you to make him a sword. Did you make that kid sword too?" C raised his voice, glaring at Heng as if he wanted to eat him alive. Gongjia Heng did not mind C's fierce glare. He frowned and shook his head. "No, although I've given Yanjiao some swords and axes, only the sword I gave to Xiao Xian is the best. The rest can't even cut through the hilt of your she sword. Those swords and axes aside, even the sword I gave to Xiao Xian might not be able to make such a cut." Then who in the Gongjia family made Yanjiao's sword? C was in a bad mood. Could it be? An older man next to him hesitated. Gongjia Ren. When Ji Fang took the throne, a portion of the Gongjia family members left, including Gongjia Ren. Others did not know where Gongjia Ren went, but Heng's trusted aides knew. Gongjia Ren and a few others were sent to Yanjiao for protection. Heng naturally thought of that too, but thought it was impossible. How long had it been since Gongjia Ren left? Plus, Gongjia Ren had never been to Xia Valley to receive his ancestors' inheritance. Even if Gongjia Ren was talented, there were many talented people in the Gongjia family. So how did Gongjia Ren make these weapons? Just as the Gongjia family members were guessing who made Xiao Xian's sword, Yanjiao's team arrived at the palace. Of course, not everyone entered the palace. Xiao Xian led 200 people into the palace while the rest stayed outside. Ji Fang had already arranged a place for everyone to stay. The last time Xiao Xian saw Ji Fang, he was still the second son of the king and kept a low profile. Now that they met again, Ji Fang exuded a noble aura. Although Ji Fang did not go to the city gates to welcome them, he sent his younger brother and himself to the palace gates to welcome them as a sign of respect. Long time no see. Ji Fang had a smile on his face. His clothes were luxurious with exquisite embroidery and he exuded an indescribable aura of nobility. His every move exuded the authority of a superior. Xiao Xian's aura was clearly different from Ji Fang's. Although he did not exude a noble aura like Ji Fang's, he had a Yanjiao aura. Those who could follow Xiao Xian into the palace were the leaders and elites of the Flaming River tribes. No matter what they thought or how nervous they were, they could not appear weak in front of these noble slave masters. Ji Fang had already ordered his men to prepare a feast, but it was still early at night. Ji Fang did not give Xiao Xian time to ask about Si. He immediately ordered his men to bring all the missing people from the Flaming River Valley here. Ji Fang was not lying. No matter how they were tortured, they were treated well in the royal city. At least they were brought to Xiao Xian and the rest in high spirits. Ji Fang was about to tell them about the special treatment the slaves received in the royal city when his gaze swept past them. He paused, forgetting what he was about to say. He saw a person, and that person should not have appeared among those who were captured. He had never seen this person before. Ji Fang's expression darkened. Although he wanted to grab the guards in charge of the captured tribesmen, it was bad enough that Robber 7 was here, but now there was a tribesman among them and no one knew. But now was not a good time to be lecturing. Ji Fang could only suppress his anger and his expression was ugly. The guard wanted to explain, but when he met Ji Fang's gaze, he could only lower his head. Gigu ordered Chu Li and the rest to bring the captured tribesmen back to their teams to check if there were any missing people. When he saw Gan Xia walk out with the captured people, he was stunned. When he saw that Xiao Xian did not look surprised, he knew that Xiao Xian must have asked Gan Xia to check on the captured people. After checking on the captured people, there were no missing people and no life-threatening injuries. Chu Li and the rest relaxed. He could go back and report to his tribesmen. This risky trip was not in vain. Let's talk about the contract. How do we sign it? Asked Xiao Xian. Ji Fang did not expect Xiao Xian to not mention Si. When he heard the haggard Si's words, he deduced that Xiao Xian must have known that he was working with Si. He thought that Xiao Xian would question him after bringing his men over, or even use this as an opportunity to ask for more conditions. Who would have thought that Xiao Xian would skip over Si and ask about the contract? Since Xiao Xian did not mention it, Ji Fang would not bring it up either. There are many ways to sign a contract, but we usually choose two. One is a spiritual contract and the other is a written contract. Both are based on the fire seed. Ji Fang explained the difference between the two contracts to Xiao Xian. A written contract was to record the contents of the contract in words and then use the power of the fire seed to draw a totem mark to prove the signer's identity. However, a written contract was not that strong. Some people would disregard their reputation and go back on their word. There was nothing you could do about it. No matter how much you scolded them, they would not lose anything. However, a spiritual contract was different. A spiritual contract requires a mark on the heaven and earth contract book. Ji Fang looked at the center of the palace. It was not a place anyone could enter. Heaven and earth contract book. That's right. The heaven and earth contract book is connected to the fire seed. It cannot be changed easily, even if you are the king. The smile on Ji Fang's face was replaced by a solemn expression. When the heaven and earth contract book was mentioned, everyone would be in awe, including himself. If you choose the heaven and earth contract book, I will bring you there. If you choose the written contract, we can start discussing the contents now, said Ji Fang. Heaven and earth contract book. Xiao Xian looked at the center of the palace. I choose the heaven and earth contract book. Gigu and the rest had no objections to Xiao Xian's choice. They could tell that the only person Ji Fang valued was Xiao Xian. Coincidentally, they followed Xiao Xian's decision. News of Yanjiao choosing the Heaven and Earth contract book soon spread outside the palace. What? Those tribesmen chose the Heaven and Earth contract book. Heaven and Earth contract book. Did I hear wrong? Really? Definitely, it came from the nobles. The royal city's spectators exploded. Yanjiao's tribesmen had chosen the Heaven and Earth contract book method. Most of them had never seen what a Heaven and Earth contract book looked like. Other than the nobles in the royal city, only the leaders of large caravans and tribes had seen it. Although the passers-by had not seen it with their own eyes, they had heard of it. Place your bets. Place your bets. The gambling house was the first to react. They started shouting and putting up a large sign. Someone beat a drum to attract attention. Everyone, guess how big of a mark Yanjiao will leave on the Heaven and Earth contract book. Why don't you come in and place your bets? Whoosh, the royal city's spectators, who were curious and eager to watch the show, were now itching for a bet. The older people knew how the Heaven and Earth contract book was bet, but the younger people did not know why and fought to ask. The gambling house's people looked pleased. They enjoyed the feeling of being surrounded by people, and also enjoyed the requests of the ignorant people. Moreover, the more people there were, the more they earned. The person beating the drum stopped and cleared his throat. He was about to explain in detail to these ignorant juniors. Unexpectedly, just as he was about to open his mouth, someone suddenly jumped out and slammed something on the table in front of him. Bet a crystal. The gambling house's people's eyes flashed coldly. They looked across the table at the person who interrupted them. However, before they could take a closer look, their eyes were attracted by the thing on the table. A crystal as thick as an arm was slammed on the table, pressing down on the spot where the words, Yanjiao, were written in red. The crowd instantly fell silent. Then, they all looked at the person who pressed down on the big crystal, as if they were looking at an idiot. Chapter 828. Because of the core seed, gemstones were extremely rare here. That was why the people here, whether they were nobles, slave masters, or tribesmen who lived far away from the city, loved gemstones very much. The rarer something was, the more precious it was. The better the quality of life, the more people who didn't have to worry about food and clothing, the more they liked beautiful and rare gemstones. A long time ago, there were no gambling houses in the royal city. The so-called gambling houses were just games for some bored people to pass the time. Occasionally, they would place bets because of some fights. Later, there were more and more organizations. Some of them saw the business opportunities in gambling and joined forces to set up gambling houses. Their purpose was not to pass the time, but to make a profit. The gambling house in the royal city was the largest in the city. It was called Fu Bo. Fu Bo was probably the most famous gambling house on the mainland. After all, it was based in the royal city. Although other gambling houses had some scale, because they were set up later than Fu Bo, they were not as famous as Fu Bo. In terms of strength, there was also a gap. Many gambling houses that were gradually rising wanted to enter the royal city. After all, the royal city was the richest place on the mainland. If a gambling house was set up in the royal city, the profits would definitely be huge. However, because of Fu Bo, they were unable to establish themselves in the royal city. Ever since Fu Bo was set up, they would set up gambling houses every day. There were various kinds of gambling houses. Through various forms of winning and losing, they attracted gamblers and accumulated wealth. If it was a large-scale gambling house, someone would inform them. People from all over the royal city would hear about it and come over. This time, it was like that. The sound of the drums told the people in the city that there was a big event and they could start gambling. However, even if they were mentally prepared, no one would have thought that this would happen. Therefore, when this crystal as thick as an arm was thrown out, some people's eyes widened. This. This was too ruthless. Such a big crystal, how precious was it? Just like that, it was thrown on the gambling table. Wouldn't it be heartbreaking to lose it? If it were them, they would be heartbroken for half their lives. Usually, they would gamble just to pass the time and use a little money to play. Everyone had different goals. Some people were really bored and wanted to pass the time. Some were just following the trend to join in the fun. There were also some who wanted to inquire about some information or get familiar with others through gambling. Of course, there were also some people who were addicted to gambling and would take out more money. The people in the gambling house had also seen some noble children throw away a lot of money, betting with precious things and so on. However, they had never seen such a large crystal. The sunlight was refracted into 7 colors by this pure and translucent crystal. When it shone on the table, some people almost forgot to breathe. This, not to mention the onlookers, even Fu Bo's people were dumbfounded at this time. Some people wanted to touch the crystal, but their fingers were trembling, afraid that they would accidentally destroy it. Abuli, how can you place? The drumming and Pu tribesmen came up from behind. People from other tribes also heard the commotion and came over. They did not follow Xiao Xian into the palace this time. Most of the people who entered the palace were Yanjiao people and the tribes who had lost a lot of people. These people who were placed outside the palace had nothing to do anyway, so they decided to go around the royal city to broaden their horizons. They also wanted to see if there were any souvenirs. If they liked something, they would buy it. It was rare for them to come here. They had just started walking around when they heard about the gambling house. There were often gambling houses in the Flaming River trading point, so they had seen them before. There were pictures drawn on the gambling table, and one of them was Yanjiao's 2-horned totem. Before they could ask, Abuli rushed over. Ever since he came here, Abuli had become a tycoon. The feeling of being able to buy a lot of things with a wave of his hand was amazing. Because he had the support of the other tribes in the Flaming River Alliance, Abuli began to flaunt his wealth. Abuli was just flaunting his wealth too much, so he slapped the table in excitement. Now that everyone looked at him like he was an idiot, he came back to his senses. This was not the Flaming River trading point. The rules were different and the way of playing might be different too. He didn't even know what the Heaven and Earth Agreement book was. After he woke up, Abuli regretted it immediately. He had been too complacent this time and had lost his composure as the chief of a tribe. What's the Heaven and Earth contract? A Longboat tribe member asked. At this time, the people in the gambling house did not mind that they did not know anything. It was easier to scam them if they didn't know anything. The Heaven and Earth contract is a way to sign a contract. Tribes who sign a contract with the royal city will leave their mark on the Heaven and Earth contract. Different people can leave different marks on the Heaven and Earth contract too. Do you see these on the table? These are the rankings of the 6 noble families of the royal city based on the size of their marks on the Heaven and Earth contract. This was also the original ranking of the 6 noble families in the royal city. The people in the gambling house did not say the second half of the sentence because this was only the ranking of the 6 noble families of the royal city in the past. Now, many things had changed. For example, the Yi family, who was ranked second in terms of the size of their marks on the Heaven and Earth contract, was now half crippled. To put it simply, the stronger the person, the bigger the mark they can leave on the Heaven and Earth contract. The explanation was simple and easy to understand. Abuli looked at the 7 big sections on the table and understood a little. The people in the gambling house continued to explain to them how the game was played. They divided the table into 7 sections. The 6 noble families of the royal city, Ji, Yi, Mu, Feng, Chao, and An, had their surnames written. There was an empty section behind each section. Other than these 6 sections, there was another empty section at the side with Yanjiao written on it. Every empty section was a place to place a bet. The gambler would bet on whichever section they thought that Yanjiao could leave more marks than them. If they could not leave more marks than any of them, they would bet on the last section. If they could leave more marks than all of them, they would bet on another section with Yanjiao written on it. The section that Abuli had bet on earlier meant that he had bet on Yanjiao surpassing the 6 noble families of the royal city. That section was a section that no gambler in the royal city would bet on. This was also why everyone looked at Abuli as if he was an idiot. There was actually someone who thought that Yanjiao could surpass the royal Ji family. This was the funniest joke they had seen all day. To be precise, the size of the mark on the heaven and earth contract was not directly related to one's strength. However, until now, there had never been a case where the mark on the heaven and earth contract exceeded that of the Ji family. In fact, there had never been a case where the mark on the heaven and earth contract exceeded that of the Yi family. The people in the gambling house were explaining things a little too quickly. Abuli could not understand everything, but the results of his cramming along the way allowed him to get a rough idea of what was going on. So you don't know the rules. Why don't you place a new bet? Someone from the royal city advised. It was not that they were kindly reminding him, but they wanted to see the disappointed faces of the people in the gambling house. If that large crystal had been placed in the empty section, then it would have belonged to the gambling house and could not be taken back. How could they win something that was impossible? Yeah, let's place a new bet. I think we should bet on the Chao family. I think it's better to bet on the Yin family. Don't you remember how Yanjiao sent the head of the Lu family flying with one slap? I think it's better to bet on the Feng family. Who knows, maybe Yanjiao can surpass the Chao family and the Yin family. Those who wanted to watch the show started to jeer. The faces of the people in the gambling house alternated between green and white. They were so angry that their veins were throbbing. They wanted nothing more than to shut these people up. What's going on? A low voice rang out from the gambling house. It was not loud, but it seemed to suppress all the jeering. The crowd fell silent again. Abuli looked over and saw a middle-aged man with a long beard walking out of the gambling house. Even the silk robe he was wearing could not hide his ferocious aura. There was a large scar on one side of his face. However, the scar on the other side of his face was painted with the face of a ferocious beast, making him look even more eerie. The person who hit the drum saw this and was slightly taken aback. He stepped back and made way for the middle-aged man. "Boss, it's like this," someone from the gambling house came over to explain the situation. The middle-aged man looked at the crystal on the gambling table. His eyes flashed. After all, he was the leader. Although he was excited, he maintained a steady and calm expression. He walked to the gambling table and sized up Abuli's group. He said, "I am Bo Yi, the leader of Fu Bo. They have already explained the rules of the Heaven and Earth Contract Book Bet." Abuli looked at Bo Yi's long beard that parted when he spoke. He did not pay attention to what the other party was saying and let out a confused, "Ah." Foolish people are easy to trick. This was Bo Yi's first impression of Abuli. Without waiting for Abuli to speak, Bo Yi continued, "How about this? You all came from afar, so it's understandable that you don't know the rules here. Even some of the young people in the royal city might not know how to bet on the Heaven and Earth Contract. You should all understand now, right? How about we place a new bet?" He purposely spoke slowly and loudly, but every word was emphasized clearly. Everyone present could hear him clearly. "Boss." The people beside him wanted to persuade him, but Bo Yi raised his hand to stop them. Bo Yi did not look at the people in the gambling house who were scratching their heads. His eyes were fixed on Abuli's group. "How do you choose? Or do you choose to believe in Yanjiao?" He purposely changed the topic. Believing in Yanjiao did not necessarily mean that Yanjiao would surpass the 6 tribes of the royal city. It did not mean that they had to keep their wealth. But at a time like this, how would these unfamiliar tribesmen choose? "Of course we choose to believe in Yanjiao." Abuli had no intention of taking back the crystal. Bo Yi's lips curled. Just as he expected. They were going to get this crystal. Bo Yi looked away from Abuli and turned to the people around him. Do you all want to play too? The drumming tribes Qin Yi and the Pu tribes Yu looked at each other. They both took out the water moonstones that they originally planned to buy, and they even took out bags of them. Like Abuli, I'll bet on Yanjiao. Zhou threw out his bag. Bam! A bag of water moonstones was thrown at the spot with Yanjiao written on it. The bag was wide open, allowing everyone to see the stones inside. Because there were already people coming and going between the two continents, the Longboat tribe sold some water moonstones here at a high price. As people from the royal city, they had seen water moonstones before. Plus, the people of the royal city thought water moonstones were more valuable than crystals. They had never seen so many at once. There were at least 20 pieces in this bag, right? Bo Yi's fingers trembled. He covered the top of the bag with his arm. Even though he only blocked a small part of the light, they could still see the light from the water moonstones. These were high-quality water moonstones, not those low-quality ones that gave off a dim light and had impurities. Bo Yi's heart raced. Hiss, someone in the crowd gasped. Another big spender. Me too, Qin Yi said. Bam! An even bigger bag of water moonstones was thrown at the spot with Yanjiao written on it. Bo Yi inspected the goods. This bag of water moonstones was of a higher quality than the previous one. Oh, the crowd cheered even louder. Bo Gu of the Gu tribe did not say a word. He opened his animal skin bag and placed the bag of ground ice stones there. A few high-quality ground ice stones rolled out of the bag. Under the light from Yangguang, they looked like the eyes of a beast staring at the crowd. Looking at them from different angles, it felt like the beast's eyes were moving. Wow, the crowd cheered even louder. They were all big spenders. The other tribesmen from the Longboat tribe didn't stay idle either. They all took out their belongings and placed them in the same spot. Bags of jades, crystals, and magnificent gems dazzled the people around the gambling house. Their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Their shouts grew louder and louder, and the people in the back were numb. However, the shouts did not die down, and the excitement of the crowd did not diminish at all. Instead, the shouts became louder as more and more onlookers joined in. It seemed that only by shouting could they vent their excitement. Gulp, someone swallowed his saliva, and more people around him followed suit. Some of them even wiped the saliva that flowed out. They could not be blamed for their reactions. Even though they were born in the capital or often came to the capital for trade and claimed to be knowledgeable, this was the first time in their lives that they had seen so many gems of such high quality. Even the Ji family rarely took out so many gems at once. Crazy, these tribesmen from the other side of the sea were all crazy. Bo Yi was so excited his face turned red. These gems were all theirs. All of them. The number of people beating the drums increased from 1 to 5. The drums were also changed to a bigger model. With 5 people beating the drums at the same time, it was as if they were going to break the drums. The people nearby felt as if thunder was rumbling in their ears. The rumbling of the drums could be heard by the entire royal city. More and more people came to the gambling den and placed their bets. However, no one in the royal city touched the Yanjiao section. Of course they had to participate in a bet like this where the results could be predicted. They were here to make money, not lose money. Bo Yi looked at the increasing amount of valuables on the table. He started calculating the odds of each section based on the value of the items. He was calculating how they could make the most out of it. Chapter 829. The tribesmen who came over put up their own gemstones. Those who didn't have any gemstones were persuaded by the gambling house to put up their weapons, but they refused. Tribesmen could live without gems but they couldn't live without weapons. Otherwise, what would they use to fight if a war broke out? Those gems? Bo-yi thought it was a pity. He heard from his sources that the flaming horns had many good quality weapons. He wanted to trick them into giving him their weapons, but he didn't expect these tribesmen to be so cautious and stubborn. They wouldn't give in no matter what he said. Although it was a pity, looking at the mountain of gems on the table, Bo-yi was excited again. They were rich. This was a huge haul. As the number of participants increased, Bo-yi quickly came up with the best plan for himself. Those who bet that the Flaming Horn tribe would surpass the 6 tribes of King's City had odds of 1 to 5. The other 6 bets were either 1 to 2 or 1 to 3. The odds here were all rounded. The lowest bet was only 1 to 2. Once the proposal was out, the number of people placing their bets increased. Some of the older gamblers had used Bo-yi's proposal as a basis to place their bets. They were worried that there might be a trap. Now that the proposal was out, they felt more at ease. However, most of them chose the last few bets. Very few people placed their bets behind the G&E family. This meant that the people of Royal City didn't think Yanjiao would win. Even if Yanjiao sent the Lu family's previous head flying with a slap, it didn't prove anything. The G&E family of Royal City had a special place in Royal City's hearts. Only 1 to 5. I thought it would be 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, someone mumbled. More than one person thought so. Even Bo-yi had planned to do so at first but quickly rejected it. First, these tribesmen had just arrived in Royal City. Bo-yi didn't know how the 6 tribes of Royal City felt about them, so he didn't dare to make his bet too obvious. He wanted to do something like 1 to 11 to 100 to attract more bets so they could earn more. But he was worried that if he made it too obvious, these tribesmen with bad tempers would cause a ruckus. If chaos ensued, they would be the ones to take the blame. The gains would not make up for the losses. 1-5 was just right. It didn't sound too different from the others. Why was it that there were so many gambling houses, but only Fubo could establish a foothold here? On one hand, Fubo was established early and had great strength. On the other hand, Fubo knew how to read people's faces and try to figure out the intentions of the nobles in the royal city. When it was time to do good, he should be firm. Besides, he had to give these tribesmen face and not make things too ugly. That way, he would be able to extort more money from them later on. Bo-yi thought. When Bo-yi told them the compensation, the people at the gambling den did not think much of it. No matter how much the Flaming Horn bet was, whatever they bet would still belong to them. Inside the palace, Xiao Xian was being led to where the Heaven and Earth Agreement book was. He saw Ji Feng's sword. The sword was not out of its scabbard, but he could feel the cold light hidden within. This must be the sword that Ji Feng used his blood to forge and used to ascend to the throne. Noticing Xiao Xian's interest in his sword, Ji Feng smiled. "Let's spar after we sign the contract." "All right," Xiao Xian replied. Just then, a Yanjiao warrior came over. He was originally waiting outside the palace but rushed in because of the gambling house incident. He told Xiao Xian about what happened outside. "Grand Elder, everyone outside is talking about it." The warrior was displeased because the people outside were looking down on Yanjiao. They thought they were all rich idiots. Xiao Xian thought about it but did not answer directly. Instead, he said, "When you leave the palace, let Gan Xie go with you. He doesn't want to stay in the palace." During the hunt for C, Gan Xie did not travel with Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian let him check on the captured people first. However, after Gan Xie returned, he told Xiao Xian that there was a fire seed's aura in the palace that he did not like. He felt uncomfortable staying in the palace for too long and wanted to leave. After the Yanjiao warrior left, Ji Feng continued leading Xiao Xian and the others towards the Heaven and Earth Agreement book. He knew about the gambling house but didn't care. "It's right in front." Ji Feng slowed down, his expression turning serious. Gigu and Ao could feel the strong fire seed's aura. They had sensed it when they first entered the palace, but now that they were closer, the feeling was even stronger. There was no sense of rejection from a foreign tribe's fire seed. The fire seed's aura seemed to be controlled in a very small area, like a sleeping person, its presence reduced. "There's a fire seed inside?" Gigu looked over in surprise. Because of the high walls, he could not see what was going on inside. The people here had long ceased to exist as tribes. The primitive fire seeds of each tribe had been merged into the bodies of their members and passed down through their bloodlines. Then, what was the fire seed's aura inside? It was definitely a primitive fire seed. But why didn't it reject them? Ji Fang smiled mysteriously but did not explain. "You'll know once you go in." The security was tight, so Ji Fang did not plan to bring too many people in. Only Xiao Xian, Gigu, Ao and Ta were allowed in. He wanted to sign a contract with Yanjiao. It had nothing to do with the other tribes, so he would not let them in, even if they were part of the Flaming River Alliance. Ji Fang only cared about Yanjiao. More accurately, the only person he was wary of was Xiao Xian. Rumble, the heavy metal door was pushed open. Ji Fang went in first. Xiao Xian and the rest scanned their surroundings before walking in. Other than Ji Fang, there were 5 other people inside. They were from the other 5 families of the royal city. The Yi family's representative was not Yi Tuan. Instead, it was an old man Xiao Xian had never seen before. This person had not participated in the battle between the Yi family and Yi Xiang. Unlike the arrogant Yi family members, this old man was very low-key. Compared to the people from the other 4 families, he did not have much of a presence. When Xiao Xian looked over, the old man's head was slightly lowered, his eyelids drooping. He did not meet Xiao Xian's gaze. After looking at the old man, Xiao Xian noticed the stone mountain in the middle of the yard. The yard was very large and filled with many flowers and trees. It looked like a well-tended garden. The stone mountain in the middle looked like a fake mountain used to decorate the garden. Its purpose seemed to be to create scenery. However, no one who entered this courtyard would ignore it because the strong aura of the fire seed was emitted from it. It was the main body of the yard. There was a huge amount of power hidden inside. Stepping into the yard, the fire seed aura grew stronger. Even the slowest person could feel it. However, just as Gue He and the others had sensed before, the aura of the fire seed from this mountain was only limited to a small area. Outside this area, it was very difficult to sense it. Other places in the palace might not be able to sense this aura, let alone people outside the palace. It was no wonder that they did not know when they first entered the city, because they could not sense the aura of the fire seed. Xiao Xian looked at the mountain. It was like a miniature mountain, very similar to the steep cliffs in the forest. The highest point of the mountain was almost 20 meters above the ground. It was almost 100 meters long and formed the shape of the letter 1. One side of the mountain was steep while the other side was like a cliff, like a mountain wall. On the other side of the cliff, Xiao Xian saw some totemic patterns. Other than the Ji family, there were also the emblems of the other 5 families in the royal city. There were also some from other tribes and organizations. Xiao Xian saw the symbol of the Black Bear Caravan. These were all signs of a contract with the Ji family. The size and depth of the totemic patterns were different. The lighter the pattern, the older it was. The pattern of the Black Bear Caravan was lighter. The previous leader of the Black Bear Caravan must have made a contract with the Ji family. Of course, the Ji family would not allow a caravan without a contract to grow in the royal city. As for the size of the totemic patterns, Xiao Xian took a look. The 6 noble families in the royal city had the largest totemic patterns, especially the Ji family and the Yi family. They were obviously larger than the others, but the difference between the 2 families was not obvious. In fact, the Ji family was only slightly larger than the Yi family. Could this be, the heaven and earth contract? Gigu asked uncertainly. Yes, it is. Ji Fang stood in front of the mountain, looking at the large and small totemic patterns on it. His heart swelled with pride again. There was a reason why the royal city was located here. In the beginning, the ancestors of the Ji family chose this place because they thought that if they were faced with an invincible enemy, be it human or beast, the Ji family could use the heaven and earth contract book's power to make a last stand when there was no way out. Why did the Ji family suppress the other families to become the dominant family in the royal city? Strength was one reason, but there was another. Back then, only the Ji family could gain the recognition of the mountain. Even the Yi family, who always thought their fire seed was the strongest, could not do it. According to the records left behind by the Ji family's ancestors, it was their blood that awakened the mountain. This mountain only recognized members of the Ji family, and only those with a strong enough royal bloodline in the Ji family. It did not recognize the weak. Another unknown reason why Ji Fang was able to succeed was that he had gained the recognition of the mountain. Without the royal bloodline of the Ji family, no one could leave a mark on the mountain. Yes, not a single mark. Even if the Gongjia family's sharp swords left a mark on the mountain, it would disappear very quickly, as if the mountain had erased it. This was why Ji Fang said that once a contract was signed on the heaven and earth contract, it could not be changed. Gue He and the others looked up at the mountain in front of them. This mountain wall was more like a totem wall carved with all kinds of totems. Inside it was a primitive fire seed that did not belong to any tribe, person, or beast. They had always thought that the heaven and earth contract was made from animal skin, cloth or plants, similar to the animal skin rolls they used. They did not expect the heaven and earth contract to be a mountain. There was a primitive fire seed attached to it. From a certain point of view, this mountain was alive. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.